A zoom zip and I wake up. A zoom zip. A zoom zip and I wake up. A zoom zip.
Together in service of understanding is the community being harmed, in what ways, and therefore what studies should we recommend. And that, of course, is the bottom line. That's at the end of the day what we're really trying to do, among other things. Let me just remind you of the kind of rules of process. I won't go through all of them, but it's important. It's important that choir stay in tune. Maybe repeating is required. So a couple of these things that are in the charter that you all signed. One is it's understood that you folks serve as volunteers and you have mutual interest in trying to sort through and come out with the best scientific conclusions or analysis or implications of those conclusions as we possibly can distill. So we are not doing original research, but we are trying to canvas broadly across information and data, and there's 20 years of it, 25 years of it, information from other places, studies, fragments of data, assertions of conclusions. So there's just lots of stuff, and our job is to sort through that and say what is the weight we give it and what studies must we recommend back to the county. I asked all of you to join in this after doing a lot of interviews because I thought you were a pretty good cross-section of talents. So we have Bob and Jay and Al and Renee, who've been in this community for a very long time. We've got Marie, who knows lots about instrumentations and calibrations. We've got Tom and Laura, who are new to the community and who bring their own specialized background. Tom, you've been in the position of having to integrate a lot of data sets to come to conclusions. Laura's got a nursing background. Bob has been around for 100 years working on these issues, and you're like the members. You're the treasure of memory on this stuff. Jay has experience in industrial safety questions. Jeff has his expertise. Jim brings modeling, lots of modeling background and statistical background. Dan has the public health background, and Renee, you've been a part of this. So I was trying to really get both some scientists as well as some community folks, as well as some clinicians, and that we would put all of our eyeballs on the same sets of information over a sequence of meetings. And we're missing Ed Fisher, who couldn't be with us today. Ed is a pharmacist and toxicologist at UHH, and Mali Tuolini, who hasn't been able to join us, who is in the School of Public Health and has got really interesting expertise in genetics and a whole variety of public health issues and epidemiology, very broad base in her work. So we have a good group, and we will also be hearing from others as we will today. So it's understood that you are here as individuals. So I don't assume, Tom, when you speak that you're speaking for Puna Alliance. It's hats off. You may say I'm wearing that hat, and you should when you're telling us that, but we assume this is an exploration and a deliberation, and that we are trying to work our way through some pretty complex pieces of information and data. So hats off unless you tell us your hat is on, and that you are now wearing your official hat of one sort or another. It's really important that we conduct these discussions with civility, because there's often a lot of outrage and a lot of anger, and there's lots of, and I'm fully aware of the larger political context. Those aren't our issues. Our issues are really focused on the health. What do we know? What don't we know? What do we need to know? What do we recommend and how it might be found out? So this is open for others to observe. I welcome their comments, but the main discussion, the center of gravity is right around this table. I ask that nobody speak for the study group or characterize it. I don't mind if you talk about things outside, but not characterize these discussions to others until we reach our conclusion, and then you're free to say, this was terrible, or this was good, or this was partially good or partially terrible. But for the moment, you've signed on for a bit of a journey, so I don't want to prejudge that journey. So I'm asking you to sort of hold back on your public pronouncements on what's going on here. Not that you can't speak about it, not that you can't talk about it. A couple of just basic rules of the road, and that is, I want to make sure that the meetings are not monopolized by any one view. In fact, I think there's very high value in getting multiple views on the table and having good questions, asking good questions, asking hard questions. The idea is to be very tough on the issue and not confuse that with being hard on the person. We can be easy with each other and pretty tough on them. So that means listening and staying focused on factual issues and factual information as best we can. I expect everybody to speak up. I expect all of you to weigh in and speak up as you would. I'm also asking in these discussions that when we go to a topic, that people not speak twice to the same topic until everybody else who wants to has had a chance to speak once, so that we can get everyone's thought thinking on the table. So those are the rules of the road. They're pretty simple, pretty basic, and it relies a lot on good faith. I will also say that I think one of the key things is to stay open. We all think we know what the answers are as you walk in the room. We've all had lots of experience. We've all done a lot of reading. And I would just encourage you to stay open. This is an inquiry, and a joint inquiry and a joint fact-finding effort. A few more things. Our plan of action today is really to talk, to hear some views from doctors who treated patients, particularly in this area. I'm going to be delighted to invite Dr. Kilburn in to share his treatments and observations. But this is largely for patients and clinicians, and what the observations are from the practices that you have. We'll do that for about an hour. I know Dan's going to have to sleep back in the clinic, and Glenn, you may need to take off, and you're welcome to stay as long as you possibly can. The second part of this meeting will really focus on what do we know about complaints in the universe of complaints. And I'm going to ask Gala to kind of briefly summarize what's in her briefing paper. I'm hoping that Bob, Tom, or others may have some information to bring on the table. But we're trying to understand what the universe of complaints is. We're not making judgments about it. We're trying to understand it as opposed to saying, well, that was right, but that one's not right, and that one's right. Let's understand first. Clarity is the first goal, always the first goal. So that's our agenda this meeting. Then at the end of the meeting, let's take a first pass at thinking through what are the kind of health studies that are already in our minds that you're going to want to put on the table. What's our hypothesis for the kinds of studies? What's our notion of what needs to happen? And what rises to the top of the priority list? Because we're invited to come forward with those proposals, but there will never be all the money that's needed to do all the studies that everybody might be interested in. So that's this meeting. At our next meeting, when we set that, we will work hard on those studies. We will just really bear down on that and come up with a preliminary set of recommendations. And then the fourth meeting, we'll take those out. We'll take those out to the public here and in the community and say, what do you think? And people will give us feedback, and then we will continue to kind of think that through. And then the fifth meeting will be to try to finalize our report. So that's the sequence, same one as before. Any questions? Seem clear? Good. Okay.
I have one. I can't get online. Is there a code or is there something?
It's right up
Oh,
there.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Others? Let's see if we can bring the docs in. So we're going to be talking with Janet Sherman, who's on the East Coast. Yep. And Sam Rubin, who's in Kwajalein. And we just sort of hit some sweet spot on the timing, which was lucky. We'll ask Glenn to come up and be a part of this discussion. And after they finish, Dr. Kilburn, Katie, may I call you Katie? Thank you.
What about Dr. Kurahara?
We've tried to get it. We've tried very hard to get a lot of doctors, and I think there are.
But you did a lot of health.
Yeah, and we'd like to get his report, and so yeah. And we were trying to get him. We've been in touch with him, and a couple others as well. A couple of docs as well.
Western Illinois was going to try to find us
The
copy of his report.
You know, I spoke to several different offices within the department, and they're not familiar with Dr. Kurahara's report.
We will keep trying to get that, Renee.
So you know which office that he sent it to, then I can, like I told Peter, I can follow up with that offhand of people that I spoke to who haven't heard of it before.
And thank you for the information you did bring up. I appreciate it's all been circulated around, and mahalo for that. You were ready. Let's dial in. Everybody got the commission panel sheet that's around?
Okay, I see Sam Rubin with his dog, and I see Gala and an outline.
Is this Janet?
That's Janet.
Hi there. And Sam, you're online too.
Right, I'm online.
Good. So we have about 9 of the 10 study group members around the table here in Puna. We have probably another 20 people who are listening and observing. And did you both receive the document that I sent you yesterday?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So what getting lots of background noise.
We have a real bad connection. I'm all the way in the Marshall Islands, very low bandwidth, so sorry for the cutout.
Okay, so if you got those, I think what I'd like to do is give each of you about 10 minutes, and if you would march through the questions that I sent you, and just try to respond to that, and then I'll ask Glenn and Kay also to speak to that, and we'll open it up. So, Sam, are you want to begin, since the bandwidth may be more of a problem on cutting in and out?
Sure. The first question is, give us a 1 minute summary of what in Puna or elsewhere where you have treated people maybe geothermal energy for that points. Now, this was 20 years ago when I worked for the Department of Health.
Sam, speak slowly. Speak slowly.
Okay. So, when I worked for the Department of Health in Hilo, and we were tasked to look into genomic complaints with Bruce Anderson, who was then the environmental deputy director under Jack Lewis, the Department of Health. And they tasked me to go out to Pahoa in Puna to set up a clinic for a week to evaluate residents with their complaint. And essentially, we at that time we couldn't really clarify anything, and Dr. Sherman will address that further. And all these studies are available, but I looked into some of the complaints with respiratory and pulmonary problems, skin rashes and lesions. According to question 2, cognitive disorders, we weren't able to assess that well. Reproductive problems, there were some complaints of miscarriages, but mainly stress and anxiety, the noise, the emission from sulfur dioxide, which was one of the confounding variables that we had to work with, was of course the lava from the volcano then, which started pumping quite a bit in 1982, and that sort of confounded our studies quite a bit. But mainly there were definite problems, and I thought they were valid with the company writing roughshod of the residents with trying to create a buffer zone and purchasing their property under market value. We insisted on a buffer zone, and there were problems with that. And like I say, there were these vague, unquantifiable complaints listed in question 2. All these studies and all the records are with the health department, and I kept that in mind up until about 6 months ago. It's very funny when I just finally got with them all. I'm sure they're still available with the health department. That's it for me.
Sam, do you see, so, maybe I missed it, because I was shuffling some papers here, but evidence that is suggestive of the specific high chronic or acute exposures of the elements that we have been thinking about and worrying about? Sam, are you there? Have we lost you? How about Dr. Sherman?
When was that study that you thought you came for a week and made the
Dan, are you still on the line?
Yeah.
I think we've lost him.
Dr. Kilburn has had some breathing difficulties.
We're getting cut out. Hear me?
Yes, thanks. It must have cut out for a little bit.
It did, yeah, sorry.
So, Sam, just a quick question. I just want to finish this. Did you see evidence that was suggestive of any of the specific, either chronic or acute exposures that were specific, that you thought were specific to some of the elements, H2S, SO2?
Well, I definitely tried to make that case. We did a compounding variable at the bottom, sulfur dioxide. And mainly I was dealing with the stress and anxiety and lack of a buffer zone, noise, vibration. I did see pulmonary problems and respiratory problems, but we were able to quantify that according to with that compound variable. I saw skin rashes. I saw reproductive problems that I had to refer out. And all these have been documented with the health department, and they still have those records, I would think.
Did you, okay, let me, we'll come back if we can maintain the connection. The fifth question on there had to do with what specific studies you think would be most important for this group to consider going forward. What rises to the top, if you have a thought?
Okay, well, I talked briefly to Dr. Kilburn, and he had some terrific ideas to quantify exposure to sulfur compounds. I would like to see another epidemiological study dealing with the lack of a buffer zone as far as noise and vibration and stress and anxiety, which is difficult to establish a baseline with. But I'm sure it can be done. And a lot of that was that. Have you seen any of the epidemiological studies from the health department 20 years ago?
I'm not sure which ones you are referring to specifically. We've seen some information, but I don't know that we have it all.
Like I said, I got rid of all that stuff about something. It was very funny that this came up all of a sudden. I thought it was finished. But Bruce Anderson had all that stuff. And they looked with a CDC guy, Dr. Mundine, or what is his name? He was the commander in the public health service. That mainly we were also dealing with the law. That's where the compounding variable in our studies. But Dr. Sherman will be able to address some of the epidemiologic studies that all have done. But mainly all that is with the health department records. I don't know who the environmental deputy director for environmental health is now, but I'm sure that's available.
We will do our best to chase it down and see if we can't bring it to the table if it's not already available online somewhere, which I don't think it is. Sam, any last thoughts before we jump over to one of the other docs?
I'm sorry,
any last thought before we hear from one of the other doctors?
No, I wish everybody great luck, and I definitely think that buffer zone is the answer, and they have to proceed with it. And I'm looking forward to hearing about Dr. Kilburn's study.
Okay, so Dr. Kilburn, I understand you're not doing all that well, so why don't you come up here and speak and then wait to a chair? And why don't we go next in the interest of your help? Come on over here by me. I would bite. So if you could take a few minutes and try to be responsive to some of those questions, it'd be very helpful.
Just provide a bit of perspective. And in the last several years, I have become exceedingly sensitive to the gas I love best to study, and that's hydrogen sulfide. And I sort of found that out 2 years ago in Alabama, where I just drove by a paper mill. I wasn't aware that paper mills were a problem. And the pond gave me the kind of cough and spell, blurry eyes that you see right now, and I said, well, I've got to get away from here before I can do any thinking. Went back and studied that group of people, and we have worked out since 1980 some very elegant ways of measuring what's happening in the human blood and in the human brain. Moving away from symptoms. Symptoms tend to be, not very many symptoms are specific enough to deduce anything from symptoms alone. They sort of like, if you're looking for heat and you figure the symptoms are heat, you're looking for the flame, we go for the flame. So in Yellow Bluff, Alabama, we found that people were complaining their microwave ovens lasted about 6 months before they burn out. And they looked, and there was corrosion. They had been given a new fire truck. It was so corroded it looked like it was about 50 years old. Chrome coming off of everything. To live in that kind of environment is sort of easy to presume adverse to health. We measured the worst in 30 studies that I've done, 6,000 people, the worst effects. Imagine, and I'm saying worse than some communities that have 4 or 5 different sources of sulfur compounds. And the chemistry of sulfur reduced to hydrogen sulfide and other reduced sulfur gases, sulfur oxide, but sulfur in water becomes easily moved from sulfuric acid on one end to hydrogen sulfide on the other. So we're not talking about the need to try to differentiate between these. It's a worthless, in my opinion, and I would submit I've got the most experience probably now in the world, which may sound self-agonizing or gratifying or something, but I have. No one has seen more patients. And I'm a peculiar kind of doctor. I'm boarded in internal medicine. My first experience was running a VA medical service with 225 beds that had everything from neurology to dermatology, because internal medicine was a general opposition to surgery. Opposition because we tried to keep the patient out of the surgeon's hands. Then, as I began to get experience more and more in toxicology, I saw the need to become an expert in toxicology. It's the most undersubscribed specialty in the United States. There are very few toxicologists. They're dying out. Very few of them have a medical background. They don't see patients. They like to see data already canned, and they put it out in the drawer and shake it a time or two and do the numbers, and that's called research. Nonsense. Research is seeing patients, every one of you, one by one, doing tests we know will give answers, and then comparing you to a population without exposure. And that is sometimes hard to find. How far is the boundary? I don't know. I know that where Tom and Laura live is inside the boundary. And it's not the volcano. I repeat, not the volcano. I went and toured with Bill Smith, the volcano, and looked at things, had a marvelous time. No problem with my breathing. Came down here and had the meeting yesterday afternoon. Immediately in the restaurant, again, had trouble. And in the meeting, had more and more trouble. The cough you hear is an asthmatic bronchitic cough. It's because I was born with the capacity to make IgE. It's one of the immune antibodies. There are only about 8 or 12% of people out of the population that have this. But that's a big proportion of people when you get matching the numbers. So I think to think of ignoring the asthmatic, the IgE producer, is a vicious mistake. I call it vicious because it's inhumane. Now, what are my big concerns? Number one, Dr. Rubin mentioned, I am concerned about birth defects because of all populations that have responded, in my experience, to hydrogen sulfide. The fetus in the uterus is the most responsive. What does it do? Autism, birth defects, failure to thrive, muscular, skeletal deformities, cerebral palsy looking things. This is part of the spectrum. We don't even have a whole spectrum because the eyes of monitoring birth defects has never been focused on the causation of birth defects. Strange as it may seem, how can you run a registry and not focus on causation? Incredible to me that the two good registries in the United States, San Diego, and I should say in North America, the others in Vancouver, do not have data on causation, but for one or two different specific things. Number two population, school children. They're our future. They are completely able to be tested from age 7. You know, if you can corral them and make them stand still for 20 seconds, they're measurable with all the things we measure. So they are population number 2. People who lived a long time in exposure. Workers, ex-workers, should be the most exposed. Continuously, we found that that doesn't seem to be true. It wasn't true in Wellington, Mexico. It's not true in Nipona, California. When a gas is out in the atmosphere, it doesn't matter whether you're working for the sewer company, driving a truck, repairing ditches, or trying to make cheese in the cheese factory, you're exposed. And these, a number are huge. In Texas, where we did a study, arsenic was being produced to make arsenic for insecticide use on cotton and other plants. And we couldn't get to the outside at 4.75 miles of the stack. Blowing this stuff over Prince River Lake in Bryan, Texas. So I have been in a continuously learning situation since I got into this roughshod environment in 1980. And I don't think the years gone by that I haven't learned an enormous amount. I think the big reason to go ahead with the health study and aim it at the brain and lungs is we know those are the organs. We need to look at reproduction because it's not been looked at adequately enough to draw any conclusion. There is no data. If you find it, please prove me wrong. But I don't think it's there. I've searched and searched. And the other thing is, as I said before, the children. The old fogies like myself would like to continue their life as long as possible. But they're not the focus of a preventive program. a wide apron, a wide area around the exposure. And remember, this is a gas that goes down here. It's heavier than that. It does collect because it squeezes the nitrogen and oxygen out. So it collects anywhere it's not disturbed. And we've seen instances where the concentrations go up from 5 parts per million to 50, 100, 150, 200, right in Los Angeles, 2 different sites. So please don't engage in doing what's been done before.
Can I answer
We don't need
a couple of quick questions, and then we're gonna hear from the other. Then we're gonna open it up, and we're back around to everybody. You said we don't need to spend time differentiating different sulfur compounds,
right.
and that your experience individually as yourself is no problems up in Volcano and lots of problems down here. Am I hearing that?
Exactly.
And so, you say it's H2S, but it could be some other combinations of H2S and SO2 or other derivatives, you know?
Well, you have to
I just want to
remember,
understand, asking for understanding.
chemistry is in motion. It's never quiet. So to make a measurement is a one-time thing. But to engage in the understanding of a continuity, where do you get the hydrogen from to convert SO2 to hydrogen sulfide? Everyone?
Water.
I mean, we've got so much water around, and in a damp, forest atmosphere, we've got water in great abundance, more or less across the day. But I don't think that to try to move at something that can't be resolved with a lot of expense and with no payoff. To resent doing things that have no payoff. Let's do the high payoff things. The high payoff things are the targets that I enumerated. And we have apparatus right now that Laura Travis is going to be showing people how much loss of function they have. And my last statement I'd like to clear up is that the matter of what you compare to. Well, of course, a population unexposed. Everybody knows exposure. But for every test on every person, we have a way of calculating the expectation. So we're in effect giving you an unexposed twin yourself by calculating these equations based on regression, that what every one of the values should be. For some things, it's very age dependent. Gender is very important. Height, weight, years of education. So with those factors, one can make the comparison make sense. Otherwise, psychologists run around in a scurry and say, well, you're well within the predicted. Your IQ is only 90, and normal is 100 to 150. So you're only barely below. Don't worry about it. When anybody who's lost 60 IQ points has more than something to worry about.
Good. Okay, thank you. And if you're feeling well enough to stick around, I hope you will. So, quick question, Renee, but I want to get the docs, and then we're going to open up and more free-for-all style. Quick question?
I have one question too, please, just one.
And at the presentation you made last night on your PowerPoint, you had one page that you put up that had 2 columns, and one was symptomology, basically, or things that the study should look at. And I was wondering if you could make those available to us, especially that page. And then the other point that I wanted to make was that I felt that I was impressed by it, and I think some of the other people here need to hear it also, is the impact of H2S on the stem cells in the brain.
We have looked for an explanation for why the brain can recover. You know, it's the one thing to say, well, it takes enough to knock the brain out and it dies. Well, that's kind of a hopeless situation. It's good for the mortician, bad for the person, but it gets them out of the system. What we're trying to understand is how the brain actually works. And we're now acquainted with stem cells. They're about 20 years old. And they are the cells made in the bone marrow that can go into various places and make new cells that develop to muscle, develop to heart, develop to a spleen or liver. And in the brain, they're made in a particular area. The third ventricle, they're very special. They don't come there from bone marrow. That's where they begin. They're laid down at the same time as the bone marrow. And these stem cells are the cells that move and become either neurons, new nerves, with all their dendrites and connections, or they become glial cells. 90% of the brain is glial cells, connective tissue, if you will. The stuff that makes myelin, the insulation. All these things are very important, but there's no reason to have them all unless you have the neurons. But unless you have glial cells to feed the neurons, it's like having a splendid tropical fish without any food. The tropical fish soon dies. So when we're trying to treat, we look for ways of augmenting the production of stem cells or the transfer of photons or electrons across membranes to make energy to run through. I mean, we all run on energy. We've been told that glucose and oxygen. Nonsense. Because an oxygen needs to be there so it can form high energy phosphate bonds. The high energy phosphate runs the cells, neurons and brain cells.
Bob, very quick question. I want to make sure we get to the other guys.
Okay,
And then we'll come back.
yeah, no, I just have one question. Basically, have you treated any people from around the PGV plant or any employees from PGV?
I have seen a couple. I won't say their names and names of privacy. They came to see me about 3 years ago. Both worked at the plant. One was a dispatcher type of really senior organizer. The other was a kind of maintenance handyman. This time the woman was brighter than the man, I guess. But they both had quite severe impairment. She with 12, 13 abnormalities. He with 6. Away from Puna for 4 or 5 months, I came back to see him. He had normalized. She was left with 7 or 8 abnormalities. I was not ready to try them on luminol, which is the treatment we've been working with, the redox agent. So she tried glutathione, said that smells exactly like the plant, and it does. It's a detoxifying agent made in the liver. We have people breathe it into the nose, so it goes in the brain, bypassing the brain barrier. If you get a chemical into a brain cell, the dendrites of the smell neurons, cranial nerve number 1, they go directly to the brain. So you trick the brain. Now, that's a malicious term, to trick, but we find that you can trick a number of ways and get things in to do their good. And there are a number of agents, just enumerate, besides glutathione and luminol, vitamin C, and mangosteen, material made from the Asiatic mango, the one that is kind of brown in color about the size of tangerine. The work from studies both in animals and human studies that start suggest this is going to be one of the principal agents to work with. We don't know much about its toxicity, except it's a natural agent people have been eating, so we have hope that it's not going to be scrubbed out of consideration because of toxicity. But the people who come to me now with exposure effects, I can give them these agents, either glutathione or luminol, and 3 hours later we test them and show sometimes 100% return to function. Unbelievable. I mean, I'm a skeptic. I was born skeptical and I've been more and more skeptical in my life. It's just almost incredible to see the change. And then they say, I'm going to be all right. Come back 3 days later, and I said, I'm right back in the dumps again. Give me that stuff again. Do it again, and come back again. How long do you have to take it? Well, I now have about 10 patients who come off it by their own volition after writing their brain, getting their functions back. One guy is living in Thailand. He called me, kept me on the phone verbally, telling me how good he was, and that I had saved his life. 52-year-old former bunker fuel operator for large ships. So this is exemplary. I have a 72-year-old man who is off. His name is Gordon. I asked Gordon to call me every 2 weeks to give me an update. He is back off his walker. He was using a walker to get around. Building apparatus for transfer of patients to wheelchairs. He can draft the apparatus. He can weld it. He's out selling it. He can get on a plane and not die from his exposure and confinement to the plane, which is another story we could go into another day.
Thank you.
My point is that this is not a hopeless situation.
Hey, let me interrupt you because I want to touch back to some of the other doctors and give them, I know some of them are on call actually. So, thank you. I hope you can stick around and join us for further questions. So,
Sherman also is like getting ready for that.
okay, we better, Dan, can you hang loose and then, all right, for 2 minutes? Yeah, it's quite late there now.
Hi there.
I'm sorry, fine.
Hi there, Dennis, Peter Adler, we're back now, and I wonder if we've just heard from Dr. Kilburn, and we're going to hear from a couple others. Could you take a few minutes and respond to the questions that I sent you?
Yeah, it won't take me very long to say what I have to say.
Okay,
So-
fire away.
Yeah. I worked on this whole Puna catastrophe about 20 years ago. And Dr. Rubin reminded me that all the data that I submitted should be in the Department of Health. All of my medical, legal, and scientific records are now archived at the National Library of Medicine, Bethesda, and they are available to any researcher. I am sure that if you can get somebody here in the Washington, D.C. area, $50 an hour, they can go to the National Library of Medicine under History of Medicine and access all the data that I submitted. Now, I reviewed about 70 medical records of people living in the Puna area and made spreadsheets so it's easy to see who's got what. And the spreadsheets go from eyes, ears, nose, throat, chest, heart, abdomen, reproductive, whole works. I also researched and obtained scientific articles on the various components of the geothermal fluids. Now, you've got one of the world's experts on the hydrogen sulfide, Kay Kilburn, so I hope that you're going to use him. He's also an expert on doing large groups of people. Now, all of the background data, including the adverse effects from the various components of the geothermal fluid, including radioactive ones, is also archived at the National Library of Medicine, but I'm sure that all the summaries that I did and submitted should be at the Department of Health. And that's about all I have to say, because this is reinventing the wheel.
Were you treating people? Were you treating patients, or are you just studying the patients?
I was asked to review the medical records as an independent person and read the different things that the people suffered from, and also review the geothermal fluid materials.
And can you just say just a word more about the linkage to H2S, SO2, or other compounds? How did you approach that? What did you come to conclude on that?
Well, I'm a toxicologist and internal medicine specialist, and the adverse effects of hydrogen sulfide and the sulfur compounds have been known for decades. I mean, this is not new information. And of course, the isotopes we've known for decades are harmful. And the persistent noise that these people are exposed to is not anything that anybody should have to tolerate in their home. I mean, this is not new information. This has been known for years.
And maybe one more question, which is what specific study would you recommend now at this juncture, if any? Or if you say maybe there's no study that needs to be done, it's all known. But if there were to be further studies, what would you study?
Well, I would leave, since Kay Gilbert is there,
yes,
I would leave that up to him. But to say that there's not an effect from geothermal fluids is crazy, because there has to be effects. And then pumping this into the ground, is it really going into the ground, or is it affecting the water supply? This is 20 years on. I thought it would have been closed down by now.
Okay. Is there any informational questions you want to ask to Dr. Sherman? Otherwise, we're going to move on, and then please stay on the line here if you can, unless it's past bedtime. How do you think?
It's pretty close.
Okay. Well, hang on till as long as you can. So, any quick questions to her? Yeah, Jeff.
And then this is Jeff Sutton from Hawaii Volcano Observatory, who's not wearing the hat right now. But the question is, how do we factor in exposure? And this is kind of a question, exposure to the different sulfur compounds. How do we gauge that? And it seems like historically it's been a problem with somewhat of a problem with credibility of some of the previous health studies, that the complaint has been not adequate level of factoring in exposure.
Did you hear the question?
More or less wants to know how do you factor in exposure to various chemicals. Well, usually it's considered that they multiply each other. They're at least additive, or they often multiply each other. So, if you've got hydrogen sulfide, you've got the potential for brain damage and respiratory damage. And if you've got the sulfur compounds, you add those or multiply those. You can't separate them out.
So, did that answer your question, Jeff? I'm not sure it did.
I guess my question was more having to do with quantitatively gauging exposure. But maybe as Dr. Coburn says, it's a fool's errand or something.
Okay. Other questions for Dr. Sherman before we move on?
I would just follow up with one. If we are having exposure problems from the VOG as an example, would it be cumulative then to add further exposure from a geothermal plant?
Did you hear Bob's question? Yeah.
What did he say?
He said if you're already exposed to VOG or other elements that may be coming up out of the rift, is it then additive? I think is that
cumulative.
Is it cumulative? He's saying then if there's more exposures coming from the Puna geothermal venture plant, is that cumulative?
Well, sure, of course.
Okay, so sorry.
Based on what?
Yeah, somebody else is asking based on what evidence? What's the evidence of that?
Well, I mean, it's a precept of toxicology that if you've got chemicals X, Y, and Z and you add more, then you're going to get a greater effect. I mean, this is well known.
So the assumption is that every little bit adds to the toxicity in the body. Doesn't matter where it's coming from.
That's right.
Okay.
I mean, it's a hydrogen sulfide from somebody's got a generator in their basement, or is it from the volcano, or is it from the Puna? That it all adds up.
Okay.
And it's all toxic.
Dr. Sherman, hang on as long as you can. We will honor that when you need to sign off and go to bed. We're going to hear from a couple of Dan. If you can, again, give us a background on your practice and then what you're observing in your practice. And
I spent 12 and a half years at the Mahalo Family Clinic right in Mahalo, and the last 4 years at an urgent care clinic that we created at the Mahalo Marketplace. And I think I've said it online. I don't know who all in this group got things that I said. When you're in a family practice that is basically the only act in town, everybody comes to your clinic pretty much for just about everything that people suffer from. A lot of people go to their primary care providers in Hilo to see different kinds of insurance. We never saw those things. But coming through the front door every day were asthmatics, smokers, people with COPD, people who had cognitive problems, people who were getting older, and were concerned about the loss of memory, people who were concerned about becoming pregnant or not. And this was a week-to-week, day-to-day basis. I cannot say that I know that there was a blip, a concentration that people coming out of Leilani, say, were presented more of those things than people in the rest of the population. I had no way of making that determination. You would have to do a retrospective study looking at all the people who had these various complaints, all the ICD-9 codes. ICD-9 codes are easy enough to pull out, but their addresses is what we're talking about. Where were they coming from on the map? I could say somebody walks into our clinic right now with a nasty cut that's infected on their leg or an ear infection, and if I ask the question open-endedly, where did you get that? I would expect fairly frequently to hear the warm spots. If I ask the question differently, did you get that at the warm ponds? Very frequently, the answer would be yes. So it's easy to identify the where for those problems. It's not so easy to identify the where for respiratory issues and cognitive issues and whatnot, people walking through the door from all over Lower Puna. So I can't say that I can make that distinction and separate those people out. You might be able to do it retrospectively by looking at where people came from. But when they come in the door wheezing, the fog is out there, they're smokers, they got COPD, whatever the problem is, I couldn't identify where in that equation.
You've answered a pile of those questions all at once. What baseline or epidemiological studies or future studies you want to lay out for consideration?
Well,
what do you think? And maybe
I don't know how practical it is to do retrospective studies because people, we're talking about, from my experience back in 1995, but clinics aren't expected to hold on to paper charts for more than 7 years, 10 years. They're gone. They're destroyed after that. Now we have electronic records that feasibly last forever. But a retrospective study might be there. The physicians that I named, Dr. Bell and them to pull out the where in the equation and take care of a patient.
One more quick question. Would they be able, if they were here talking to us, I know it's hard to know what exactly they would say, but maybe would it be possible if clinicians met to say, well, I'm seeing more of this in Puna or less of this in Puna, more of this in Hilo, less of this in Hilo, more of this in Hamakua, less of this? Or would the observations be too blurred to make any sense?
I think honestly they'd be too blurred, but when you're talking about Puna, we're talking about this 4.1 mile radius kind of a thing. I mean, where is the line? You can't get out. You can't find the end of the circle. You know, it fades into Kayal and it fades into Hilo.
There's another point, and that is that in the clinical records, we don't have it like that. This person lives in Leilani.
Renee, she's here to board that one.
This person, we have their mailing address, and for so many people, it's just a PO box. You know, so you have no way of knowing where their physical address is to be able to judge whether they're within that 4.1 mile or whatever.
I could say that when you think about the complaints that I have heard people complaining more specifically about the noise. You don't get noise complaints from most areas. You get noise complaints from around the Puna geothermal. That you could specify. But the other things that are a little bit harder to tease out aren't so easy to identify.
Yeah, I hope we can stick with it for a few more minutes.
Can we ask questions of that?
Quick question.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back.
Well, so you can't say whether it is, but you can't say it's not either, right?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, you
Yeah. That's what I thought. That's what I thought.
Hang on, Dr. Silver. There'll be a moment. I want to get through the first line up here. Bring the chair up, if you will, so people can see where you are and who you are. Okay. Maybe first tell us about yourself and your role and what you're seeing or what you're using or.
I'm the medical director at Med Clinic, and so I oversee the clinical aspects, medical aspects for the Hilo Clinic downtown Seattle, State Clinic in Pacoa, and the one down at Adler. So I spent most of my time practicing in the Cal Clinic, although I actually worked from all of the others, and I spent a half day a week in the Pacoa Clinic anyway. So I have a chance to have been around a number of these clinics and circumstances. I've been the medical director there for about 5 months now, so I don't have near the long history a lot of you have, but I have seen many thousands of charts as I do this, we do quality controls and reviews and all kinds of things with charts, so I get a lot of exposure to lots more charts than just the patients I happen to get to see. And so that's pretty much who I am and the circumstance I'm here. As far as things that any of my patients actually attribute to the geothermal project, I've never heard anybody say they attributed any of their issues to that, okay, directly. And also, I'm not finding it in the charts. Now, having, like I say, looked at a lot of charts down here in the whole area too, I just don't see it there, okay? People ask questions, we always ask questions of, what do you think about this, one thing or another, and we're just really not seeing that right now. So, as I give you information, that's all I can say. I can't really say the how or why of it. I can't say that I see, just in a general way, even if the patient didn't complain or blame it on this, I can't say that I see more or less of respiratory, skin, or even some of these cognitive issues in this area than we normally see at the Hilo Clinic or in Cal Clinic. So, I can say that about those particular questions. As far as evidence I have about that, or which could be related to it, again, I think my previous answers already kind of suggest that. One thing I can say, though, which I think is probably always going to be the issue and may lead to the future, is how much VOG really does have to do with this. I know the components of VOG and the components of what's coming out of the geothermal project are probably somewhat different in some ways, but I can say that in any of the clinics, when the wind changes and the VOG blows straight over Hilo Town, just bang, we have kids, adults, people coming in sick with acute flares of their asthma. And that's what sulfur dioxide does to people. And people that seem to do pretty well over here until they go to South Puna and go to the beach or something, come back hacking and coughing, and that goes on for a few days. So the fog very much causes respiratory problems for people. And I haven't been here to hear all the other components of what's coming out of the ground there too. As far as further research on it, it's always a challenge when you take, okay, we have a group of people that are sick and comparing them to normal controls somewhere else, but it's almost like normal controls here, but people breathe bog all the time. And how would you, the challenge is to separate this out as far as to say, okay, the people, bog causes respiratory problems, hydrogen sulfide causes respiratory problems, but radon doesn't usually cause respiratory problems, it causes other things that can happen. And so as far as the focus of research, and I'd be very curious to hear the differentiation too, would be to have, you probably have to have two groups of normals, controls out there, but then there have the control for a research project here is probably going to be people who have to breathe bog a lot, but don't ever breathe geothermal project gases. And you get those two people separated apart, then you find out how much is different. Now again, just like the toxicologists say, you have multiple things going on. It's always a challenge with toxicology is if you're breathing 12 different things, which are the ones doing the most to you and which way? And if fog and geothermal emissions overlap by 80%, how are you going to separate those out? I can't. That's the main thing I see is that the control groups in research is going to be the difference between the geothermal locale and the people that have to breathe fog fairly frequently anyway.
So I just want to make sure I understood what you were saying, because you're saying you're looking at the charts of a number of different areas where you have clinics, and you're not seeing one thing jumping out. You're not seeing the respiratory problems, the lesions, or the reproductive. I mean, is there anything that you see that says this is different here than it is elsewhere? But you may not have done the study to that extent of examining all the charts. But I'm just trying to, what am I hearing? What are you saying?
Well, I practiced 21 years in Texas, in the county in East Texas, and as far as just the sheer amount of allergic rhinitis and simple asthma and things like that, believe it or not, I see less of that here in Hawaii than I did in East Texas. Now, where I live in East Texas is the mold capital of the world. I mean, mold specialists, fungus specialists in the world have their conventions in East Texas because mold is so bad. And mold is not as big a problem here. So, I can't correlate exactly why, except that and there are a lot of oil, oil is big, and everybody, a lot of my patients are oil workers for around all kinds of other things too. So I can't really say that I've seen anything specifically, and in reviewing charts, it looks like it's so specifically related to this that couldn't also be attributable to volume.
Okay. Thanks so much. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for joining tonight. I hope you can stick around for a few minutes if you can. So, questions now?
Yes.
Any of the docs?
I didn't get your name. I'm sorry. Dundas. Thank you for coming. Okay, so do you know, like, is Puna? How you were saying, like, you go to Kona, there's more VOG than Puna. I mean, I live in Puna. From what I see, I think we have some of the lower VOG levels in the island. Do you know? Do you know? Maybe Jeff knows that answer.
I haven't really looked at a specific map of who gets the most VOG.
Okay.
When I drive around the island.
But when you see it in the air, do you see it out here or do you see it in Gila? Yeah, you drive around. Okay, maybe that's not your question. So, okay, the other question would be this: if we do have VOG impacts, or you were talking about 12 elements, we may have, you don't know which one it is, but I've been reading and looking at it. If you have, they're cumulative. Like if you have a problem with 2 or 3 or 5 elements and you add 3 or 4 or 5 more elements to that, isn't that a medical problem? Isn't that I mean, if you're already sick or you have a problem because of VOG or some other thing that's in the environment, and then you add H2S, arsenic, or whatever else, pentane, whatever else it might be, isn't that a problem?
Certainly could be, and that's what I'm talking about.
Right.
The
Thank
whole
you.
population for this needs, I
I
would suggest
agree.
people are getting involved. And there's so many, virtually everybody here gets a little VOG sometime,
Right.
and some get a whole lot more other times.
Right.
And so there should be a difference. If this is geothermal is truly causing a problem separate from anything else, then you should see 2 different groups of people. If it's causing a cumulative problem, you should also see separate data for the people within that radius or downwind of that, who are the ones that are suffering from as far as that goes. So again, it's such a challenge because all medical research and research is pulling from other places in the world that don't have VOG.
Let's keep going.
Thank
so
you.
Laura, you had a question.
My question was, Jeff, then you're saying that definitely we do have lower VOG
Correct,
here.
yes.
So really, we wouldn't want to compare ourselves to the control group B, a high VOG area.
Yeah, VOG in Lower Puna, it tends to be much lower than VOG in Hilo, for instance. Hilo experiences, even though Hilo is nominally upwind, it experiences episodically high VOG at a frequency greater than, say, Tahoe Town.
I'm going to go to people who haven't asked questions yet. So
Yeah, well, we were talking about control groups and we were talking about ways to distinguish between populations that experience both H2S and SO4 and only VOG. And so I was wondering, well, wouldn't it be more productive then, at least in my mind, what do you think about this, to have your control group completely away from the volcanic source? So say up in Kauai, we have a control group in an area where there isn't any source of H2S, and then do a comparison there. Do you think that would be more productive?
It would give you information about the actual effects of these things, but I think just what I'm getting from this is that the issue that needs to be differentiated is trying to separate what's geothermal and what could be attributable to VOG. That's not the only issue, but that's the issue that's going to be probably the most biggest factor for further development, expansion of it, or any other controls or anything to get put on it, is how much of this is VOG that no one can escape except by moving off the island, and how much of it is geothermal. So the researchers know more about that. I'm not a researcher.
Marie, and I'm going to go to people who haven't asked questions yet, and to any of the doubts.
Medical test questions for our beautiful doctor here that's helping us. I have read that there are blood tests that could be done, like the sulfide ion. These are PP workers who might be exposed to a higher concentration. There's also a urinary test for urinary thiosulfate. What's your opinion on the possibility of using those for any of the groups we've been talking about who might be exposed to the higher levels? Would this help us in determining which are being maybe more exposed to hydrogen sulfide than normal?
The appearance in the blood of sulfite is very variable. The idea that you can measure people unless you do it in fractions of an hour after exposure is totally fallacious. So it is useful in a laboratory setting where you want somebody to take a dose and then see what's happening. The blood level, yes, it goes up and then it goes down. In a population, it is truly not a working situation.
Yeah, because it doesn't stay in the body that long. It's like 7 or 8 hours and then it's excreted.
That's right.
Yeah.
Some good work was done in Calgary several years ago by Wernitzky, who's a Pole, and he had to go to an animal model in order to get the data. Then you see that this stuff, sulfide, does go to the brain, and it is associated with the falling off the lower rod, which is a test for rat imbalance and impairment. But it has to be done under these extreme specialized conditions.
Other questions? Yeah.
I was just wondering, in all your tests, did you ever consider gender as affecting the health study in any way? In other words, does it impact women more than it impacts men?
Gender is extremely important because, as I said last night, women do everything better than we, except show strength. We're built a bigger muscle frame, so we're stronger. Beyond that, gender does come into consideration. Number two, women are much more able to express symptoms than men. If you look at averages for 35 symptoms, men and women will be different. But you can make allowance by this percent predicted scheme that we've worked out. Then you can throw men and women together, make your loops smaller, because you don't have to have huge numbers when you got both genders together. So there are ways of handling these data. But the curious thing to me, I would like to ask everyone to think about, where do we find the control group? This is extraordinarily important. You put your finger on it. I would like to know where to go. Should we go to Wailea? You know, where is the perfect place on the island to get people who have the least chance of either exposure? And I think the two exposures are the same, so you can't separate them, and it would be useless to do so. But if that said, where do we go to get the control? Question?
Maybe a possible response comment to that, and that is I've been involved with one of the bog studies that Elizabeth Pan over at John Burns School of Medicine has been running. This group this study followed a group of school-age students, and it's been in process now for close to 10 years. What they found, I guess, or what they chose to do in terms of the control group was look at people in Hamakua, so Hamakua Coast, and then also in Waimea, this island, as being kind of the best you can do on this island. They had enough statistical power to do that. So that would be one possibility. But one of the things, again, I keep coming back to this issue of exposure. It seemed important for the success of this study to not only measure the populations, the performance of the population, lung development and respiratory development, but also measure or come up with some way to quantify the exposure of these individuals to bog in this case.
Jim, Jay, Tom, what questions might you have? I want to make sure everybody has a chance, including the shy people.
I'm not sure I'm shy, but
I didn't think so, but I just thought I'd check.
Unfortunately, I have two questions. I'll ask my most important one, I think, and that's, as an engineer, I tend to think you get this exposure, you expect this effect. And when my wife had a baby, I read that there was an average time that she was supposed to be in labor. So when her labor started, I went off to Taco Bell to get something to eat. And I found out that the average, that there's a large variance around that mean average, and I about missed the baby. So my question for Dr. Kilburn is do you think there is a wide range of responses to a single exposure? We've talked subpopulation.
Single acute, high level.
In other words, if we gave everybody in this room a single exposure, is it possible that 3 of us would say, that didn't affect me at all? 7 would say, yeah, maybe my eyes hurt, and 1 person have a severe attack. And that's what I wanted to ask is,
variability there.
Yes, the variability around the mean.
Well, we're not interbred white rats, as you know, and everyone in the room, I'm sure. So there is wide variability. That said, you can still use the variability, do plots, look if there are outliers that have an extraordinary effect on the changes in the mean. In other words, there are good ways of dealing with this spectrum of human response. But if we make measurements and then, have the opportunity to, all these differences sort of fall out quickly. So there is a good way of doing challenge response studies. And I teased Dr. Adler this morning. When he came, I said, we need to catch you at the airport, measure you, and then catch you 2 hours or 3 hours later down in the room. If we did those measurements, then we have a perfect way of seeing what the effect is.
When he said catch Peter Adler, I thought he meant when he falls over. Counting on you for that. That's some big guys there too. Jim.
Yeah, so one of the charges of this panel is to evaluate all these different studies, some of which contradict each other. And so in the spirit of skepticism, I'm wondering, have you seen this paper by T.L. Giletti, 2010? International Journal of Toxicology. The paper is called Hydrogen Sulfide, Advances in Understanding Human Toxicity. It's a review paper, in a peer-reviewed journal, and it addresses your studies directly, and I don't think the panel has seen this, but I wonder, since we rarely have the actual author in front of us, I'm wondering if you could respond to some of his criticisms. Referring to 4 of your studies that he cites, he'd say they require evaluation as a group and close attention because of issues regarding quality assurance and testing methodology, some of which were revealed at a major conference in 2000 and in legal proceedings since then. He then makes other kind of critical observations about the work. So I'm wondering, do you know, are you familiar with these criticisms at this conference in 2000? And
well, that was the Legator Kilburn conference. We didn't make him a major domo in that conference. His resentment festered, and I think what you're sampling is festered resentment. That aside, Giuliani is the highest bidder respondent. So he's been on both sides of this issue, and he has been in San Diego and Alberta and back to Georgia, where he finally got signed off the faculty for his changes of opinion on this, among other issues. So I don't put him in regard high enough to have.
Can I broaden the question? Sure. Let's imagine we were having a good debate here, and you had what would the critics, either methodologically or substantively, of your work, the Gator's work, the clustered studies, Sherman's work, what would they say? Just so we understand what are the things we're trying to tease out here. What would they say if they were here?
You mean the paid operatives of the defense of your...
Yeah, look, I mean, yeah. Well, people might argue that about anybody. They can say, look, the source of funding is the be-all and end-all, and nothing goes beyond that. On the other hand, they say on science, on the basis of the science itself, what would be the critique that they would make of you, and what would you make of them? I think that's kind of maybe Jim was trying to take us to in using that. But if not him, what would others say? Because not everybody is, unless you're saying everybody else is disreputable. Yeah, I wouldn't think you'd say that.
The amount of effort, amount of work goes into this is so huge for one of my studies. Most people won't comprehend it. I'm not saying they couldn't, but they won't. It's too much work to dig in and critically look at 30 different things of measuring the human brain. I can't even get professional paid psychologists to do this. So a lot of it I would brand as lazy. Number 2 is that since the Dahlberg Supreme Court junk science issues, it is absolutely predictable that anything you do in science that involves money is junk science. I mean, it's just automatic. It's a response. And how do I respond to that? I try to educate the judge, the jury, taking them through step by step how the mind and the brain really are complex. And there's no way to make them simple. So let's take one end of the complexity and go through it. And when I've been able to do that correctly, I have had very few who ended up saying, this man can't testify about this issue. So it's a matter of where you start with understanding and how far you have to move and how much opportunity you have to spend. This is not a 15-minute. This is not a soundbite. This is not an hour issue. This is an issue of seriously spending a couple of hours considering, one, how the measurements are made. They make sense. None of them ever been disqualified as a method. They've been used in clinical medicine for years. The Romberg balance test, 1850, and it's been steadily improved. Well, where do you take the improvement of being fallacious when all it is going from cathode ray oscilloscope to computer and to smaller and smaller amplifier systems? I find that is an abysmal abyss of lack of understanding. We don't understand mind. We don't teach this in school. Science doesn't get into considering brain. And most graduates, bless their hearts, have a very, very limited education in anything close to science. So trying to make them the gatekeeper for is this good or bad science? The easy thing is to take the brief handed them by the defense and say, I agree, it's just science. Well, when they came out of the defense bar to get on the bench, that is extra easy. And then you say, well, did you try medical school before law school? You begin to cut to the quick, immediately contempt the court. I've been through all this. So I know as an insider trying to get these issues across.
Have you been in the Adler hearings? And have you been disqualified from anything?
Well, when I don't present myself, about 50% disqualification. When I do present, we've only had about, I think, 2 or 3 in 20 years. And 2 of these were on issues that were already settled. For example, there's an issue in the Supreme Court in Minnesota about organophosphate effects on people from spraying chlorpyrifos years ago, indoors. Well, it's open and shut. One, you shouldn't ever do this. And you produce mind loss that's mind almost with people who can't do ordinary tasks. And we presented this, and the Minnesota Supreme Court decided that they would uphold the judge who ruled this out, and the headlines in the newspaper was EPA decision ban Nursban for indoor use. Now, who do you believe? To take the judge from the Supreme Court of Minnesota or EPA for the country? That is the way as I've watched this panorama unfold. That, when we lose, I simply say, well, next time we'll get a different judge. And that's a lottery system. You get a judge.
This is a question. Jay, question? Jay, question? Or either that.
Well, sure. No, you mentioned urine tests, and we've all been talking about subpopulations and control groups and different groups, and you're absolutely right. What we're trying to figure out is what impact the geothermal plant has had on Puna. And so I'm wondering, nobody's really said what we're going to do with these groups, what we're going to ask, what we're going to test, I don't expect to subject a lot of people to brain analysis. Is something that we're doing here, are we talking about x-rays? Are we talking about blood tests? Are we talking about filling out questionnaires? Let's get into what our goal is here, is to come up with something realistic we can do to answer some of these questions adequately. What I don't understand still from the experts talking, and maybe nobody else does either, is how we differentiate between what the geothermal plant might be doing, what mold might be doing, what pollen might be doing. Your symptoms could be caused by any number of things. Is that correct? Not necessarily at the geothermal plant.
Well, please focus away from complaints can be defined. We can semi-quantify them, and we analyze them, and they generally are a sort of measure of how bad it is overall. But if you want to know what's happening, we have to measure function, performance. You don't measure a high fruit alert by asking how tall his mother is. You don't measure a high jumper by saying, can you swim 100 yards? You've got to focus on how a test is done and do the test and make the measurement. What I'm submitting is that in evolution for 30 years, we've learned a certain amount about what should be measured. It's not simple, and it 12 stations at the cross, but about 15 sit-down mental cognitive memory tests are important, but they're only a part. We measure balance. We do that by standing with the feet together and tracing in space where the head is moving and measuring from that the speed of sway, which ends with tension, returning balance to upward. Reaction time we do with cancellation of appearance on the screen of an ALS. Blink reflex is done by tapping on the forehead to stimulate the sensory muscle of the eye to get the lids to close. So it's a two cranial nerve reflex that is so refined and so simple it can be done on unconscious people. They still won't do it unless they consciously really fix them down.
Okay, then. So what you're saying is that your group has a series of tests, has a way of determining the answers to our questions.
Yes, and it is a series that we've had a lot of experience, and in my book, experience meant constant refinement. I'll sometimes get asked in court, why are you no longer doing thus? And I will say, we analyzed all of those data and found a better way to make the measurement a little more precise, a little more able to define and focus on, is it or isn't.
And just to be clear, I'm going to kind of work with Jay's question here. So it would be, those tests would be able to disentangle exposures from different sulfur compounds and from other substances. You'd be able to say, that, because I can see where you'd say, look at this population and they're sicker or less healthy than another population. You had your control group. But would you be able to then say it's because of H2S or it's SO2 or it's other sulfur compound or it's other transformations of sulfur? Or would you be able to say, no, it's H2S? Would you be able to get it down to that from those tests?
So let me answer that by having you think of the brain and function. Function can be made improved, can be made impaired. All the way to impairment is permanent death. Okay? All the way to too much activity is epilepsy, convulsion. Activity that gets out of control, but it's activity. Shaking, Parkinson's disease shakes, for example. So all these things have to be considered as the brain has a limited way of responding. You get a profile for, let's say, mercury, or let's say lead, or let's say dirzban, or hydrogen sulfide, or chlorine. We've done a lot of studies looking to see how much can you bring it back to a specific cause. Not very far. So you have to use other techniques to arrive at probable cause. And we use the technique of differential diagnosis. What is the most probable? And you're dealing then in a world of probability. More likely than not probability. Not is 95% confidence interval. So it is more complex, but it's doable.
Yeah, I'm looking at your 2003 paper, and you have a list of the responses, the functions that you got for that particular group. And so I'm really interested in seeing that there are several kind of categories of these tests that you do. One, you tap their forehead and they blink, or they take the time to blink. And that's sort of an autonomic reaction to a stimulus.
No, not autonomic.
Well, okay, whatever the correct term is. Okay, but it's not something under their cognitive control.
Right.
They cannot fake that. But other ones, like a response to an auditory stimulus or tracking something in three-dimensional space, that is a behavior which could be faked, right? So my question is, do you have techniques for differentiating somebody who has a vested interest in an answer, a particular answer, and knows all of the issues associated with the reason they're doing the test, and from someone who's just responding a completely naive person? Is there a bias here along the way?
Your question has been thought about a lot, not only by me, but everybody who's in the field. For the last years, since 1984, every 3 years, there's an international conference to talk about these things. That said, the answer to what to do about the possibility of being misled. The things we're talking about happen with that you can't interject the conscious mind and be anywhere close to what you automatically do. For example, responding to reaction time or balance. Or when you do that, faking is so apparent that you can weed it out. You can weed it out by the tester saying, that wasn't a very good response. I think you can do better. And make the internal competitiveness of the American spirit arise. And, I was testing Laura a few hours ago, and she said, I understand this. Why did I do worse on the second time? And I said, I guess I failed to tell you that you should beat your first time and the second time, not try to just do the job. But if you can get people, and most of them will, to respond to the competitive spirit, then there are different ways of analyzing responses. Some things, it's the median of the last 7 responses, because the variance is huge and means go all the way around because they forgot to do the job one time. They got an 1800 and the average is a 300. So each test has its own John Thornton, Brad Henson, Kate Tobin analysis of what are we expecting, how is a good test judged, and then we've taken psychologists and said, please help me. Fake, muck up, screw up the whole thing. We get good tests. So even people who think they know what's happened aren't able to give us anything. I question repetition of the test. We do a lot of repetition. So they're all, that's a sample.
There's a lot of, how are we going to determine if it's hydrogen sulfide or if it's that? But is one of the things we're going to try and do is just determine that there is a problem in this community. Is that the first step to this, and then look at? No, that's a question. Is it a question of determining that we do have some kind of problem in the community, and then taking it from there, or do you just do it all at once?
So there's a problem that's out of the norm of other communities.
Okay, we're not saying it's PGV, we're not saying it's fog, we're not saying anything, we're just saying we have a problem in the community. Is that what we're doing? Is that part of it?
Bob, you put your finger on the critical matter. If you don't do that first, then there's no use going further. Unless we find this group of people is different from YMBF or some other selected group or less exposed to a considerable degree, there's no reason to go forward.
And then maybe at that point,
then we can differentiate there.
Because I have a question for Jeff that kind of ties into that, and actually for PGV too. So at that point, if say there were a problem determined, I would like to find out if you're monitoring for H2S around the island, like you have monitors. I know you monitor for VOG and all that stuff. So are you monitoring? So we'll have some kind of comparative data. Are there H2S monitors in other places of the island? And also for PGV, they have source point monitoring. Could we get all of that information?
I am truly optimistic that we're going to get all that information.
My question would be, I'm with him. My background is monitoring, and we have we have the abilities now to monitor all, not only with equipment that single cell monitor for, say, like hydrogen sulfide, but we can do like an 8-hour sampling on, say, a different kind of media, like charcoal tube as an example. It's a glass tube with silica or charcoal or some sort of a media in it that would attract whatever it is you're sampling for. Then you take and you go into a chemical lab and you analyze, and it can sample for 2 or 3 or 4 items on the same charcoal tube. We can do that also. So he's right on establishing exposure to what. And from what I've been seeing so far, and I haven't come to a real good firm conclusion yet, but it's looking like we're not monitoring enough for enough variety of things other than 1 or 2 items.
Broad enough bandwidth.
We're not doing a broad enough, and this is the United States of America in the 21st century, and we have the ability, the technique, the equipment, we've got it. It's just, and not only that, if we don't have the equipment, the state of Hawaii could possibly borrow from federal OSHA on an OSHA standard, or maybe EPA. I mean, other federal agencies have equipment that we could bring in, maybe, if we ask.
We've asked. We have
Because
asked.
we've done this with Oregon OSHA.
We asked for that 20 years ago.
Well,
many times.
Can I just say that, I think it's within our mandate around this group to say, here's the studies we think need to be done, and here's the monitoring that needs to be improved.
This is what I'm
So we will have that latitude to say, what's the consensus around this group?
That's my
What's
question.
our hypothesis that's driving that? And I think that's going to become important.
I mean, I'm with him. We should maybe ask, what are we being exposed to? Well, that's sort of relatively easy to answer that question chemically by monitoring or testing the air with, like, say, a charcoal tube or an air filter. I mean, there's various ways of doing it. For metal, for example, you would do a plastic glass container with a filter paper in it.
Hang on to those, because the third part this is the first part of the discussion.
Oh, okay.
And the third part of that is going to be, what's our preliminary ideas? What's starting to gel and cook in our heads on this stuff? All right, look, I want to see if there's any more questions for Kay or for Glenn. Yeah.
The first question I asked, and never got responded to, that in your PowerPoint you had one page that was 2 columns.
Can you make that available? Is that available, Bob? Is that going to, you were hosting yesterday, I think, right?
Do you know what page I'm talking about?
Can you make that available?
I don't have it. I'd love to have a copy of the PowerPoint. You have to ask Dr. Kilburn has the PowerPoint. It's his PowerPoint.
Do you have it? I can print it out.
Yeah, because when we come to the point where we're talking about what should help study consistent, I think we might be very well advised to look at.
Well, we'll take a break in a little while and see if we can get that, if you're willing to share.
Of course.
Okay, yeah, I would think so.
Let me just answer quickly. One column is physiological tests, light balance, reaction time, discrimination of color, blink reflex, vibration, thresholds and visual fields, feeling, I probably left out 1 or 2, grip strength. On the other side are the things that start with cognition, problem solving. We use a test called Culture Fair, devised for grade placement. Kids going from the south to the north, when their parents were working in the auto factories in the 30s, been around a long time. The Cattells retired here to Hawaii. I think they're dead now, but they were exquisitely bright people who made this test so wonderful that it's been adopted all over the world. Then there's a third category, and that's the 2 or 3 tests that measure feeling states. And one of these is called profile mood states. And it was devised at Yale in 1960 to evaluate the effect of the first round of the mood ameliorating drugs like Valium. And what it came up with at the Yale students was a 0 because you had vigor compared to 5 adverse feeling states: patient anxiety, depression, anger, confusion, fatigue. And it should come out 0. When we used the test first in 1980, the average was 22 in our control people in Wickenburg, Arizona. So you can use the tests, but you have to update them. And there's a lot of changes that happen. Some of them may have occurred because we're more and more polluted, America, North America. But still, by constantly monitoring what's happening, we can make these differentiations. And what's the correlation? Well, between some tests very high and some have no correlation at all. So if you want to draw conclusions, you've got a wealth of data, which is always available from us. If somebody wants to, massage the data another way, make sausage of a different size, we're happy to help them with that.
Unless there's any last questions that I want, yes, Don?
The last question, and I just want to be sure of the answer, is I wanted to ask Dr. Kilburn and any of the other physicians that have an opinion is,
We only got one left.
well, I think you already gave your opinion that we needed at least 2 control groups. I wanted to just ask Dr. Kilburn what the best approach was with the number of confounding issues. We have unique physical environment coupled with the geothermal plant, coupled with confounding issue of fog, plus social-economic issues that are probably unique in Hawaii as well. And if you put those all in a stew and you're trying to understand something, and maybe your answer was you find out if there's a problem first, and then you look at the nature of that problem, move on. But I wanted to be sure I understood that, because that's the one thing I can't get my head around.
Well, what you're giving a partial response to, Tom, is exactly right. If there isn't a problem showing up in the test by using statistical examination of these data, then there isn't a problem that can be solved this way. Doesn't mean there isn't a problem, it's just we put this set of measurement sticks in, and we get so many measures. The measures have worked quite well. I've used them against, I would guess, 25 or 6 different types of exposure. So they work as well for issues like trichloroethylene from, coolant fluid, from PCBs and hydraulic fluid. There are just lots of places we've applied this, and each time it's been kind of wonderful to see that we would either pull out if there's something going on here, or there isn't. If there's nothing going on, most people are willing to take that at face value and say, okay, we'll quit squawking about it, squawk about something else. So it has a negative way of taking the issue down a step. If something's found, then you're into the grapevine of where are the best control groups and what can we analyze by doing more explicit monitoring. My own answer to in the H2S is that we haven't found that we can be quick enough, and it's just because all the monitoring takes time to collect the sample, to analyze the sample, and a spike of concentration of 2 seconds, averaged out in 10 minutes, is nothing. And the spikes are what knocks the brain out, causing unconsciousness and so forth. So you get insight into what you've got to pay attention to in the way of exposure. And write then a prescription for monitoring with very specific answerable questions. Not let's monitor something, because you can spend an infinity of resources. But why do we want to know, and will it help us solve the human impairment or illness problem?
Glenn, any last comments that you want to make? Because we're going to bring this to a close, take a break, and then reconvene and talk about complaints.
The one thing, because some different good issues being brought up, is that one of the things that's a very strong trend in the practice of medicine these days, as far as the way the government does things, finances things, one thing or another, is they show us the money. They show us where these health issues are causing an increased burden, financial burden on the country, or economic burden, or whatever. And if you can prove that, then all of a sudden more funds are drug, they'll fund all this stuff for you. And so, as you go through all this, I mean, air quality could be good, bad, terrible, different here, different there. What they care about is outcomes. And that's what we care about. We want healthy people, right? We want healthy people one way or another. And you're right, it doesn't all have to be measured by symptoms. They don't all have to be gagging and choking all the time to prove that they're suffering an impairment by it. But that as far as trying to get someone to pay attention, or a legislator that says, okay, if there's going to be a financial detriment to the state of Hawaii by not expanding this, what's the payoff? What are you going to be saving in health costs to the state of Hawaii by fixing a problem that you perceive as a problem? And those kind of real concrete, how are you going to help people make their lives better and cut costs? State, government, those are the kind of things that will kind of make things happen. And of course, you need the data, you need all the information, but just from the clinical side of things, that's my main interest, is that people decide they don't have better health. But
thank you, Mr. Kilburn, thank you. Thanks, Dan D'Amico, who had to leave to go give someone a shot. Thank you very much, Dr. Sherman. Thank you very much, Dr. Rubin. So let's take a 9.3-minute break. See you back here.
Thank you.
And we want to be scientific.
Will I be able to make a comment at 4:30?
I encourage folks who are filming all this, it's a moving film, the film is for me to get tired, as opposed to snipping a piece out and snipping even this. Okay, what I want to do in the second part of the discussion for the next hour is to really try to work through some what we know and don't know about the universe of complaints. And I was telling Cal and Catherine earlier about there's something in the work in the field that I've worked in, which is the sociology of conflict and science and policy. There's a kind of a well-known pattern about things that says when there's a disturbance in our force, let's call it that, when, something goes from normal experience to this isn't normal. There is this progression. We try to find a name for it. We try to identify the and blame causing agents, and then we try to make some claims about that. And when those claims are rejected, then you're in the world of disputes. So what I want to do is, I mean, it's just as a backup, but what I want to do is understand the universe of complaints. And we set out to do that, and Bob, I know you've been doing some pulling together of materials out of the community here. Tom, you may have some things we're hoping also, with Jane's still here, you may have that information, or it may come from Tom or Laura, however it comes. We want to understand what is that universe, and we're not trying to evaluate its credibility. It's really simply a task of trying to understand what are people claiming about this, and what are they complaining about, and what are the allegations, if you will. I'm putting it in legal language, which isn't really that perfect. So, and I also want to ask Calla if you could summarize as a starting point the briefing paper. I know you all slept with it on your pillow and memorized it, but just go right to the heart. What were the things? Because I asked Kayla to treat this as if she was a graduate student doing research. She doesn't know what information does she have that tells us either demographic information or health information about the community. So Kayla, could you do a summary, and then I'm going to go around and see what you brought to the table, and Tom, and anybody else.
Like 3 sentences or parts through different?
Yeah, summarize your section. Maybe that's
So Peter asked me to kind of paint a picture of the Puna health situation, and when I started looking into stuff, it started to feel like I was putting a puzzle together, and that some pieces of the puzzle were easy to locate. And overall, I think a picture is beginning to emerge, but I'm still missing lots of pieces, and I'd love to get like a women's health survey and the other documents to go in. So it's kind of an evolving process. But I went to the TPD plan, I went through their complaint log for close to a decade, and my impression was the noise complaints were by and large, the majority of complaints are from like 3 to 4 times the amount of anything else. And there also seems to be a progression where small complaints were higher in the early 90s, and then that kind of waned off, and 2000s were predominantly noise. I looked through the relocation request of the planning department. I only found one that had documented medical history, and there seemed to be a lot of confounding factors for the one relocation request. And county council testimony, I looked through the Laserfish records and plugged in a variety of different searches, all kind of around the Puna health, PGV health, and what I took from the testimony was that there was a lot of second-hand accounts, but very few people said, I have X, Y, and Z, and I live, a block from the plant. A recurring theme in the testimony, though, was that a definitive public health study is worthwhile. And from the Department of Health, the only thing I was able to find online was a survey done by the Healthy Start program comparing Leilani State and Hawaiian Beach State, and they basically didn't find any significant differences. But they did say, between the two communities, but they did say that rates of acute and chronic health issues, including chronic respiratory conditions, were higher in both of those communities compared to the county and state numbers. Although they made a point of saying that the presence of natural volcanic vents in the vicinity makes it difficult to determine the contribution that geothermal energy production and...
May I ask a quick question? Are you talking about the Anderson, Bruce Anderson Department of Health?
No, the one that compared Hawaiian Beaches, I think that was Bruce Anderson.
Yeah, I know the title is State of Hawaii Study of the Health Status.
No, I'm pretty sure that's Bruce Anderson. I'm pretty sure that's Bruce Anderson.
Yeah,
I'd like to
that's the Anderson study.
And I'd like to comment on that too.
Well, we're not presenting this as anything definitive.
No, I just wanted to be sure that I knew what she was talking about. Yeah.
It's so scant that I wouldn't build much off of any of this stuff.
So then, kind of grander conclusion, so the what we know question, I took away noise is clearly a nuisance, and high acute levels of H2S, for instance, like at the blowouts, can cause damage. What we don't know, exposure numbers, and we don't know long-term longitudinal studies. And I think the recurring theme of what we'd like to know is definitively if there is a health connection between the energy production and the...
And do you have that written down somewhere?
It's in the briefing paper. It's in the third briefing paper you all received. So, and again, lots of caveats and cautions. We're not posing this as anything more than a snapshot, best we could pull together with the time we had looking at these sources. Renee?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I remember when the whole rule was passed at the county council that created the asset fund and how people and the relocation fund and what the criteria would be for people to be able to claim from it. And one of the things that happened was that they were going back and forth about this and that, and then the chair of the commission, who was Kenneth Baylog at the time, said, well, I worked on it overnight, and here's what I did. And then they just passed it, and there was no ability for the public to comment on it or anything because it hadn't been put out ahead of time. And as a result of which, the plan that was approved by the county council at the time made it almost impossible for anyone to actually file a claim. It was so onerous in terms of the paperwork and everything else. You needed 20 copies of everything, and they were asking for many things, and a lot of them were totally unrelated. But a lot of people could not even pull that stuff together. And they basically set it up to make it almost impossible for anyone to file. And that's why the planning department says, oh, we hardly had anybody apply for these funds. So you have to know some things historically in order to understand why you get the kind of data that you do.
Fair enough. Again,
a lot of people here weren't around at the time, but some of us were. I remember the hanky-panky that was going on because we lived right through it.
So again, we're not posing this as anything more than a snapshot that I asked Cala to do by looking at a few sources and saying, what's in the document?
Right.
What do we see? What's on the face of it? Knowing that that's probably a pyramid and there's lots more on it. So accept it for that.
I can help, I think.
Yeah.
I would suggest the first thing that you got to do is there were 140 lawsuits filed by people against PGV. They were settled in, all but one were settled in favor of the people that filed the lawsuits for damages. That's a record. That is a record. I sent you the information. Okay, so basically we don't have the resources to go through those court files, but in those court files, each one of those cases has a doctor, has documented health complaints and things. So I asked you before, and you said maybe you don't have the resources either, but if you want the information, that's where it is. Besides,
can I ask you, is that available?
It's available at the courthouses. No, it's not. You might not be able to get the names, but it's not sealed. Laura actually looked through it too.
The complaints. You can see the complaints.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
And so I'm telling you, you've got 140 people there that PGV paid for those complaints. So I think that should be part of what you're looking for here. But you guys are going to have to do it because it takes resources.
Actually, all we need is the complaint document, and that's it.
Somebody has to go. Somebody has to go to the courthouse and do that. It's on microfilm. So anyway, and then also, the Hawaiian Beaches study, I just want to say, because it was talked about here, is that anybody that said they were sick was excluded. I wasn't allowed to participate. Any of the people that had health impacts, the Department of Health said you can't be part of this because you're biased. You're rabidly, so anyone that was sick was not included from our area at that time. Also, another place you can find complaints that I found, 4 pages. I listed them all. I don't have them with me because we're still compiling this stuff. But I have 4 pages in a notebook of complaints that came out of the EIS. That was, I believe it was in 1991 or something like that. I don't have that with me right now. But basically, I know you mentioned it, didn't you, Kiala, that you went through it and you took a sampling and you said there were some for and some against. But if you go and you read them all, vast majority said they had health problems. Like I said, there's 4 pages, got to be 50 of them.
Is that testimony from the council?
No, it was federal EIS.
Okay.
Yep. Anyway, I have that link, so there's a lot right there as far as complaints go. And then also, we have a lot of the historical complaints we've been going through, and PGV didn't keep the document. They were supposed to record the name of the person and some other things was the criteria of how it was set up, and they didn't do that. We're finding complaints with no names. I can tell you I filed at least 500 complaints, and I finally sold my house because I couldn't qualify for relocation. I was in a really bad spot, I felt. Really close to the plant. It was noisy. It smelled a lot back in those days, and I wanted to be relocated. And I waited 8 years or 10 years or something. I finally sold my house for $75,000 and left so the relocation. And what Renee was talking about when how they came in at the last minute with the new rules. Oh, I worked this up last night. What she didn't say was the community had spent 6 months working on the rules. So we spent 6 months working on rules for relocation. On the last day, the guy running the thing comes in and says, well, I redid them last night, and this is what I'm going to submit, and they passed it. And then only 2 people were able to qualify for relocation back in the early days. And so what happened, because those 2 people, nobody else could qualify, then they started taking the money for community benefits, which was never intended. They took $6 million out of that fund. And now we have 30 people that want to be relocated, and we're being told there's no money to relocate those people.
Can I just steer it back in?
I'm sorry. Okay. That was part of the conversation.
That's one of the reasons why it's important to have you here, because you have such a long history on it. But let me bring it back to what are the health complaints that we know and
All right.
understand, not because we're trying to document thousands of complaints, but because we're trying to get a picture
Right.
of some of the things that we're wrestling
Well, okay,
with.
so like I was saying on the, as far as, if you go, there's a problem with the historical records because we're going through them and they're not there. I don't see 500 complaints filed by me. I'm finding 5 or 10. I know I complained every day. I complained every day.
And you would be looking at PGV, or
I'm looking anywhere I can find them.
council, or
Department, I looked everywhere I could find, and so far, we're going through, basically the stuff that we have are coming out of boxes that we have. It's not coming from anywhere else. So I would suggest you talk to Department of Health. I would suggest you talk to PGV again, and you ask them to look harder for complaints.
Let me ask you, what if you could characterize the health aspects of those? Because you characterize it for yourself. It was noisy, it smelled bad, I'm getting, fumed out by H2S or whatever it is. How would you characterize the other complaints? Give us your top of the pyramid picture.
Well, Laura and Tom have been compiling. I think they've been reading them recently. Have you? Maybe they could say it better. I mean, it was all those things. It was evacuations. I don't remember how many times I had to evacuate my house, but it wasn't 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times. I lived in my car for a lot, over a number of years. Or many times I just slept in my car. PGV paid for hotels for me occasionally, but because most of that was, even prior to that, was HGPA, so I won't blame PGV for all of that, but it was terrible.
Let's hear from other than Laura. What are you
a
learning?
lot of the complaints were like shortness of breath, eye irritation, throat irritation, headaches, stomach cramps.
These are sources of these complaints.
Those were when I looked through the legal documents.
Okay.
I said shortness of breath, eye irritation, throat irritation, headaches, stomach aches, and I'm just recalling off I'm sure I'm missing some things, but these were big things.
This is, the lawsuits, Dr. Adler's right in, I think, the way to characterize it is the settlement is sealed. But the testimony is a matter of public record. So you can go back through the lawsuits, read the testimony, and hear what the complaints were and what doctors.
Don't call me doctor. I don't make my kids do that. So
what I looked at, though, was actually the doctor recalling what was written in their records and the symptoms that the patient reported, the observations by the physician, assessment, and then diagnosis and treatment.
About how many patients was that, Laura?
Not very many, because it takes a long time to go through microfiches, but there was just tons of it. I mean, too much for me to go through, and it's $1 per page to copy it.
So again, what we're trying to do is get a picture in our head of what are the patterns of complaint, what are they about, what's the center of gravity of those complaints. There could be
fogginess is another one.
And
fogginess.
The two that I heard, I heard a lot when I was interviewing people with respiratory and pulmonary problems, skin rashes and lesions, cognitive disorders, reproductive problems, and stress and anxiety. And then what we've added to that are eye irritation and some stomach complaints as well.
I've got one more. One instance when it was particularly bad, I was so sick, I was very sick. I had a huge fever, 104, couldn't even walk. I was so sick I couldn't drive myself to the hospital. I called Harry Kim at Civil Defense, and he came to my house and he drove me to the emergency room. So I was so sick, that's how sick I was, is I couldn't even drive my car. And I did see Harry Kim around here earlier, so I'm sure he can verify that.
Earlier there was a statement made about that there are now more noise complaints than there are hydrosulfide complaints. And I think they shed a little light on that whole issue. Because as most of you know now, I did do monitoring for about 5 or 6 years in Leilani, line of Puna Gardens, and around the perimeter of PPB. And up until about 5 or 6 years ago, there was always a background H2S on my monitor between 0.003, 004, even 005 at times. PPM. just looking at it at that point, all of a sudden, like I said, 5 or 6 years ago, instead of having a 3, 4, or 5 background, all of a sudden it went down to 0. And it's been 0. And my question then, when I first asked PDV and their experts, quote experts, I said, oh, well, that's because you have fishes all around Leilani Estate and in the area, so you're getting the background smell of H2S on your monitor from that. Well, then I got a big question. The big question is then, why all of a sudden 5 or 6 years ago, all of a sudden I've got zeros on my monitor all the time? So the theory that it's coming from fishes doesn't really hold water for me. I suspect that when PGV went and put their 35 monitors along the perimeter of their plant, I think that's when they discovered where a lot of their leaks were coming from, and they probably solved all those problems, and that's why now you don't have the H2S problems that you had 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah, I know that there were quite a few people who ended up hospitalized around the time of the blowout. So if we could get something from the Hill Medical Center redacting the names and addresses of those people, or if we could, some of us could go out and talk to those people. I know that there were several police officers, right, Robert?
Yes.
Who were directing traffic during the blowout.
Yes.
And
that information's in the.
They had portable breathing devices, and they went to Hilo Medical Center to the emergency room, and after that, the chief of police made a statement that he would not, if anything happened at the plant again, he would not allow his officers to put themselves in danger unless they had the portable breathing devices. But I don't know if they ever got them.
Yes. That's in the Goddard and Goddard report, all that information.
4 people. Then Emily Niola was living right across from Paul's service station in Bahal at the time. And her son Coca, my godson, was 4 weeks old when the plant flew. And he went into respiratory distress. He was in Hilo Hospital for 4 days on oxygen. And so I remember that. I don't know if she ever filed a complaint about it, but the baby was in the hospital for 4 weeks, for 4 days. And the other one was Gina, who was pregnant at the time, and her fetus exploded inside of her uterus. I don't know. That's all I know is what she said. The doctor said that the fetus exploded.
So we got this bandwidth.
So there is things like that and she told me she, for a long time it hurt too much for her to go and talk about it. But she said at the right time she would. And I think maybe it's time to approach her and ask her to come forward.
Let me turn to, and I don't know who to turn to, whether it's Tom, Laura, Jane, what can you tell us? I know there was a women's group, they met for a long time, there was some data gathering or something. What can you tell us about that?
Well,
and I don't know who the person is to ask.
We each have done different things, and Laura has spent most of her time going through and looking at the complaints medically so that she understands those. Laura also spent some time comparing logged health complaints with the actual apparent health complaints, and we have some comments on those. I spent most of my time going through and analyzing the health complaints by type and what the various complaints were. But I need to ask a question before I respond, and the question I need to ask is, what is it that the group really wants to know about the health complaints? My problem is we're going down a lot of different discussions here, and I'm not sure that any of the discussions impact our total goal. And so if I have insight into what the group wants to know about the health complaints, I probably can answer the question, at least for the records I looked at.
Is there an interest in understanding the complaint?
Yeah. Well, no, wait. There's an interest in understanding the question or the answer. I mean, I agree with Tom's skepticism there, embedded in that is that, Dr. Kilburn has told us symptoms don't help us that much. So what's the connection between the complaints and studying the responses?
Well, I don't see how it affects if we're going to do a house study or not. I think we've decided we're going to do a house study. So it's a lot of work. There's a lot of information there. I think there's enough information there for me to draw a conclusion that we should do the house study.
There's to do it briefly, there's the Anderson study, what I call the Anderson study 84. You called it something else, but it's the same data.
82, I think.
Well, that's when the data was taken. The study was published in 1984. There's the Center for Disease Control study that was done in 1990, published in 92 based on Anderson data in 84, and the other data, similar data taken in 1990. There was the Goddard report that was done as following the blowout, which categorized health problems following the blowout. There was the Legator study that was done a couple years after the blowout that looked at numbers of health complaints and came to the conclusion that there was great respiratory problems located near the geothermal plant, but then he went on to say he didn't have a good enough control to come to conclusions. There was the Sherman study of 1993, which was associated with people that had suffered from the blowout. And then there's the Woodlands Health study from 2012, which is, of all of those studies, perhaps the least structured. Is just come in if you've had some problems and tell us what they are, study. And all of those studies, I can tell you what the nature of the things is, but the thing I would like to point out is that most of those studies were early, all associated with HGPA, and there may be somebody here that wants to defend that, but if I have to be on one side of the debate or other, I will say that we didn't do well with HGPA. And then there's issues with the blowout, and if anybody wants to say there weren't health effects from the blowout, I will really jump on the other team, on the debate team, because I think that's a near indefensible position. And then there's the period after that, those acute exposures, and the structure of the studies after the exposures is both you said and Al said, is such that it's much, much harder to tell, to get a good firm grasp of what's going on. So anyhow, I'm ready to talk about any one of those periods, but I need to know what you want to know.
And why you want to know.
Yeah.
That's the right question. So what I'd like to do is hear from others who haven't spoken yet, whether this is even relevant or we may move forward into starting to talk about the kinds of studies that we think are going to be needed. My notion is that we would have that discussion today as a precursor to the deeper dive on that when we meet next. So is there anybody who thinks that we really need to do a better job of pulling out all the complaints or understanding that universe of complaints? Because we maybe will just say, good, there's a lot of complaints, that's in our report.
May I make one more?
So we may not need to spend our time on it.
Condition 5, and Mike knows this, he has to do the report. Condition 5 of the GRP requires Mike to go through his logs every 6 months, list all the complaints that were given to PGV, and forward them to the planning department. I think additionally, your other permits, and I haven't traced it down yet, I think we can trace all those complaints additionally go to the health department. So every complaint that's been given to PGV, if we're really interested in what the complaints have been, should be documented in that series of reports that have been sent to the planning department every 6 months.
So our culminating report could say there's a lot of complaints.
And
that may be sufficient, and we can, bring forward what we've got, plus others.
Right.
And maybe a summative statement, that's the jump off, and we don't need to go.
If there's somebody that wants to know that there might not have been complaints, I'm ready to sit down and answer that.
I want to hear from each of you how important that is, because if it turns out that we don't really need to spend a lot of time, let's not spend time on it. We've got some stuff, we pulled some things together, we can try and gather what we want into a final report to the extent that's useful in the report. And so then it sits out there and for future reference and future guidance to others that may come after us. How about, where you sit? Is this a useful lecture? Because I don't want to spend our time doing something that's not useful. I'd rather go to the heart. Yeah.
Okay, when I first heard you say that, do we really need to go and talk about this shopping list of complaints? My reaction was, we should say something about the elephant, and we're going to describe what we see there. But now I guess I'm kind of, my thinking has changed on this, that what we do have is a very wide spectrum of complaints. And perhaps if we do have some kind of a summary statement about those complaints, just like Laura was bringing up a little earlier, maybe that would be enough. Maybe that would be enough, and then maybe it would be better to spend our time going to the next issue. We should be in agreement there. I mean, it's inequitable. There are a lot of complaints.
I'd like to hear from each of you. How important is it to dive deep into that versus, and do more than we've done, versus, and try to pull the documentation that we have together, versus moving on? Alan.
Just based on my experience in the field when I used to be a technician in the field, I handle a lot of complaints, and the intriguing thing about complaints is it all depends on, first of all, who it's coming from and what it's all about. And a lot of times I discovered that the complaint that I got on the phone versus the complaint when I got there were two different issues on an awful lot of occasions, because I was a service manager, and one of the things I would do is I would get on the phone with the people, and then when I got to the account, I never told them who I was. I just been a technician, and I would get another story. And that was always intriguing to me, how the story changed between the time I talked to my phone and the time I got down there. So, I don't know. Complaints to me aren't really a valid way of judging this.
Well, I think I've heard all I need to hear about the past complaints. I mean, I'll concede there were problems, a lot of serious problems over the years, but what happened in the blowout really doesn't say what we need to do right now. It's it's water over the bridge. It's different management, it's different equipment, it's different people, it's different technology, lots of other things are available to us. So I'll concede we've had some big mistakes in the past, but I don't think we need to dwell on the results of those.
Yeah, well, the whole reason that this working group was called in the first place was because there were complaints. And that's really a no-brainer, and there's no question that there have been complaints. And then there are a lot of people who will never complain, they'll just suffer in silence, So even the number of complaints you get is not necessarily a conclusive piece of information. The point is that there have been complaints, that there have been health impacts. Certainly, people have been kept awake by noise, and that causes sleep deprivation, which causes stress and all sorts of other stuff. The important thing, I think, for us to concentrate on is making recommendations for a health study. We wouldn't decide what kind of tests should be done, but I think that what Dr. Kilborn has provided us with here is a really good starter, for what sorts of things a health study should be looking at. And of course there are other things as well that have to do with respiratory stuff, that have to do with reproductive things and like that. But certainly this is a good starter right here. And I think that this is where we should start concentrating, because that ultimately is what our job is. And one of the other things we should be doing is then looking at some of these studies that were done, a lot of which end with the conclusion more study needs to be done. and look at some of where they felt that more study needed, so if we feel that it's applicable, we can plug it into our recommendations. But also to determine which studies, we should put a little more veracity in. Some of them might be skewed, like Dr. Cooper mentioned the other night about an industry-funded study that took the young people and exposed them for a very short period on occasion, and then tested them and said, oh, no problem.
Hold off on the study question,
Yeah.
what we're gonna do. We're coming to that. But I want to just settle this question on whether we should do a further reconnaissance and deeper dive and further documentation on this. Because if we don't need to do it, let's move on. And we have enough that we can certainly just talk to in a report back to the county.
Well,
So hold that. Hold the thought on the study.
Yeah.
We're coming to that.
Yeah, and creating our new study, or what we would advise, we should maybe do something a little different maybe, or a little more in-depth, a little more, use bad language, a little more better than more better than what we've been doing. And again, this gets back to the subject of what are we really being exposed to? Yeah, you can do the study, but study on what? So again, it goes back to my subject that I keep bringing up, is the issue of monitoring. Why could we not suggest a 365-degree monitoring of the perimeter of PGV for more than just what has been monitored? We can do a variety of things like metals and gases and radon, low-level noise. We can do this, and we can do it for a longer period of time. This would give us at least a baseline now. I mean, we know we had the blowout. Okay, but we've got conditions now. So we could at least get some sort of a baseline going in case there's more future complaints. We would at least have a baseline from a chemistry standpoint of what kind of metals are coming off, what kind of radon. We can do this now and do it for the entire circle of their fence line, and then maybe an additional half an hour, an hour and a half, however we're going to develop the study.
I assume from what we've already talked about, what we've heard, that we are going to make recommendations on monitoring. I just assume that. I assume we're going to make some recommendations on future monitoring, better ways to do it, more comprehensive, more detailed, better data, all those things. And I assume we're going to make recommendations on studies. So I want to just stick with this and make sure that everybody's in concurrence that we'll move away from complaints. We can always come back, but we're going to not spend our time doing that. Time is precious for us.
And I was going to say, recent complaints also, the Leonie's Women's Group, there were a lot of people that, some of the people in that group actually moved here after the blowout that were complaining of things. So I think that you're right. We can probably, I feel like that's a good idea to just move on to the next step.
Bob, hang on, I still want to let others come in, and you've already spoken once.
Laura, is that your name, Laura?
I know you have more.
What was
Jeff?
Lorraine.
Lorraine. And Jeff, and
I think the only reason for studying historical complaints is that there is some connection between those and chronic effects. So it doesn't seem, obviously, doesn't seem to be much. I mean, the beautiful is local, presumably, and so what if we can do, if we choose to advise them about doing a study that encompasses chronic events, then maybe the historical complaints would guide whoever does the study. That's the only reason I can see for studying the post-92-91 event. And I don't know, I can't answer, I'm not a medical person.
I kind of said my piece, but in support of that, the shopping list of complaints, I think that we have would support the monitoring thing. And I also thought that monitoring, both health studies and monitoring were part of our mandate.
It is. It's in there.
Okay.
Okay, I want to agree with Larry, is that correct? On the monitoring, and I'd say we should try and, because we're going to need that for the health study, the historical monitoring data that PGV has from those, particularly those point source monitors. I want to point out also that just because we haven't had a blowout recently doesn't mean we're not going to have another blowout. They're continuing to drill wells. The monitoring system, in my opinion, doesn't work, and I'll say why. Last year, there were 2 instances when I smelled hydrogen sulfide in the community. I called the power plant and they told me there was no problem, and there was no leaks. And further following up with that, they ended up having to backtrack and say, yes, there were leaks, but the monitors read 0. So we're in the community, we're smelling hydrogen sulfide, and the monitors, they're telling us, are reading 0. To me, that says that the monitoring program has a problem.
And that's an exposure question because we can't tell what's
And
going on.
and we're going to have to fix that for a baseline study. And we should do that baseline study because not only are we talking about PGV, now we're talking about 20 more companies wanting to come in here and build more power plants. Whether that'll happen or not remains to be seen. But if you go through historically and look at the percentage of well blowouts from geothermal developments, it's quite high. Some people say as high as 1 in 12 wells. Other people say it's a different number. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's high. And the probability of another well blowout, whether I know they believe that they understand why they had the well blowout, but they're still having well blowouts around the country, around the world, drilling these wells. And you're putting this right in the middle of our community. So I think, we need to, that has to be understood. And, as far as that goes, we're going to look at PGV. PGV had 19 civil defense emergencies between 1991 and 1999. Those were declared civil defense emergencies, 19 of them in 8 years. There's no power plant in the history of the state of Hawaii that has any record anywhere near that. So this has not been taken seriously. This is from my point of view as a community person that's lived there. It's never been taken seriously. We've never been given taken care of and looked after by the Department of Health or any of this. Last year or this year, I think it was December, they had another re-injection well casing fell. So you go in the paper and you see what they say, and PGV is in the paper saying it's not a problem. Well, EPA is supposed to oversee re-injection wells. Well, it turned...
Can I interject? You're pushing on an open door here. So, because we are interested...
Okay, well, my point is just this, that we can expect more, just because maybe for 4 or 5 years we haven't maybe had a major problem. That doesn't mean that we should not look at worst case scenario or half worst case scenarios, because you are going to have more problems.
I don't mean to cut you off, but I also want to stay very focused on...
Okay, no, that's fine. I think I made my point.
Yeah.
I just want people to understand that. You can go 4 or 5 years and still expect to have something bad happen.
I think we've heard from everybody that let's not spend more time on complaints. We can always move back to it if it turns out that it's more important than we knew on February 10th. So with that, let's shift into the last part of the discussion. And again, the notion of the process is that we would start to have a discussion, which we've all been sort of pushing on anyway, which is what are the kinds of studies. Hang on, I'm finish my thought. And at the next session, we're going to do a pretty deep dive into framing those studies that we think are really important.
I circulated an email that was a copy of something that Suzanne Wakeland wrote. And at the bottom of that email, she provided the definition of health by the World Health Organization. And in a separate conversation with Suzanne, she suggested that maybe one of the first steps that we should take is define what we mean by health. So that, because if we, and I'll just point out why it makes a difference, if we define health the way the World Health Organization defined it, then we have to go back to consider the stress in the community of living near the plant and the consequence of that stress, what Al talked about in the original thing. If we have to then look at noise, and then we have to look at real health effects. If we're talking about real health effects, listen to me. If we're talking about the absence of disease as health, then that narrows what we look at. And so I think it's an important question, and I would like to propose that we have a quick discussion about it before we do a deep dive on what to do about the health study. Just a suggestion.
Well, not so fast. Hang on for 1 second, because I just pulled up the definition of health, which I'm aware of that definition. I've heard it before. And I'm looking at the Wikipedia, which isn't always the best source of everything. So it says health is the level of functional and metabolic efficiency of a living being. In humans, it is the general condition of a person's mind and body, usually meaning to be free from illness, injury, or pain. The World Health Organization defined health in its broader sense in 1946 as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. Although this definition has been subject to controversy, in particular as an operational value because of the problem created by the word complete, it remains the most enduring. It goes on, classification systems such as World Health Organization, Family of International Classifications, including the International Classification of Functioning Disability Health, and others, are commonly used to define and measure the components of health. So one of the points in this is that you have to. One of the arguments is how do you put metrics on it? How do you put some metrics around that so that you don't wander around in the ionosphere on this thing and be unable to come to a conclusion. So I'm just sharing that with you because I think it's a worthy discussion. You guys have and that's one that World Health Organization is a good one. But the question is, are we able to put some measures on it? Is it amenable to science and to study and to measurement and to engineering and to the disciplines we have around here? So let's talk about it. What's your thoughts?
I would say just because you can't put measurements in this, God, I'm supposed to be talking like scientists, but just because you can't measure it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Right.
So there are things in our lives that exist that we cannot explain, and science is not. It only has tools to measure certain parts of it, but we don't discount those other things. So I think we should remain open-minded at keeping WHO's WHO's evaluation for what. Don't throw out the social, spiritual part of it just because you can't quantify it.
How about others? I think this is a very worthy conversation, and then it will lead you into thinking about what are the studies you want to do, and what is the deviation from whatever you say that standard is.
Well, I agree with Jeff that not everything is quantifiable. I know a lot of times when I write grant proposals and they expect you at the end to say how you're going to, in a quantifiable way, how you're going to show that your project was effective, but they want you to quantify it, and not everything is quantifiable. And that's okay. Some of the best things in life are not quantifiable, like how much you love someone. But I think that we also need to remember that some things that you wouldn't think of, like stress, for example, are quantifiable. There are actual instruments like blood pressure tests, for example, that can quantify. You can tell someone you let the person wait out in the waiting room and sit for a while until their heart calms down, and then you tell them to think nice, peaceful thoughts, where you get them to look at something visual that's very relaxing, and you take their blood pressure, and then you tell them if they have cancer and they have 3 months to live, and watch the spike. There's some things that you would not think of as not being measurable that are, and a lot of us, if what we're talking about in quality of life, there's less many documents that are incorporated in that definition of health.
Well, the quality of life is so unique to every individual, really. I can understand noise is a big complaint and a big problem here. But, a lot of metropolitan areas on the mainland, noise is viewed totally differently than it is here, or around airports. If we're going to make judgments on quality of life, I don't know how we can do that really for everybody else. We can express our own opinion of peace and happiness, but it's, as you say, it's not quantifiable. We can suggest physical studies to determine some things about how our bodies are doing, but whether we're at peace with where we're living, I don't know if that's in our arena, really.
Yeah,
well, from my standpoint, if I can get a reasonably nice night's sleep, if I can breathe reasonably clean air that's sort of reasonably okay. That's sort of a borderline base for me. If I have access to reasonably good food that's not contaminated with a lot of chemicals, then that to me is part of my baseline of good health. So there's certain baseline expectations that I have that probably everybody else has. You know, get a good night's sleep, not having a lot of noise disrupt me, not having to have my eyes being irritated or my lungs being irritated most of the time. You know, there's certain parameters for good health that everyone would expect that I think we can use as a kind of a guide to what good health should be aiming for, so to speak. That's how I judge it.
Bob, what do you think about this?
I would.
What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I would, I think we got to look at a lot of different things. Post-traumatic stress syndrome from blowout, from all of these things. How does that affect people and how they feel about things now? And, is how permanent is that? How does that carry through? Noise, noise is, they're saying 70 dB is acceptable in an agricultural community. I think maybe their PGV is saying they can operate within 55. I can tell you that 55 dB bothers a lot of people. We hear that from people a mile away, that the noise is a problem. The issue I have with that with PGV is there's technology that can control that noise, and that it didn't have to be that way. And it's been 20 years, I don't know, they've been there since 1990. We've had this noise issue brought before them, and they haven't dealt with it. And in my opinion, they're in violation of their permit, and they're going to argue they're not, but and how does that affect children that have to go to school or people that have to go to work? So there's a lot of things that that are probably affect people's health.
So I'm just still looking at this PPP piece, which I'm happy to send around to you folks. And this is more detail around the World Health Organization. It says, according to the WHO, the main determinants of health include the social and economic environment, the physical environment, and the person's individual characteristics. And they list 12 specific things, which range from income and social status and education, and social environment, and physical environment, and personal health practices, down to gender, culture, healthcare services, a whole sequence of things. So it may be possible for us to say, well, our job is not to evaluate all those, but here's the pieces that we want to try to come to some conclusion on. And maybe we have to be somewhat selective of this thing and say, well, in terms of health services, physical environment, healthcare, those are the areas that we're looking at. I'll send this around.
I appreciate your argument that the WHO definition is sufficiently squishy that it makes it hard for a health study. For me, the reason that this was of interest was that I do not want to exclude the description Al gave, which I thought was very compelling the first day. His home was invaded several times, that he had to leave it. And anybody that's ever been robbed and had somebody in their home knows what it's like not to have home as sanctuary. And when I first thought about it, I said, well, this guys in Iraq get PTSD, but having that happen in your home is to take away the last sanctuary. And I think that we should be open to discuss looking at that. I also think we should be open to discuss the stress and the effect of noise on social adjustment to the environment. If those are the two things that right to my mind jump as these are important. There may be several others, but I think I tend to agree with you that we need not to exclude things based on the fact that it may not be a disease or that it may be squishy. That we probably need to specify which ones we're going to look at.
I think we're going to have to, if we're going to use that as a jump off for a study, then I think we're going to need to become somewhat clear.
Right.
So that we are not saying, well, now we're going to evaluate the culture, or we're going to take on all the gender questions that are at play. Or, I just think it's beyond what we can do, and it gets us farther and farther away from the PGV plant, too, yes. Which, we might hold Mike's feet in the fire on a lot of things, but I don't know that I'm going to hold his feet on the fire everything's going wrong on all dimensions. Well, maybe it wouldn't, just for fun, we could pick on it.
Well, you're right, because, in briefing paper 3, we have a lot of technical data here about the demographics of the area. We know through what is being accumulated from the statistical picture of the area, how many people are in the lowest third per capita income. We know all of this. So that really doesn't need to be part of the study because we already know how poor people are in the area, which adds to stress, lack of food. So we know from a standpoint of future study, some of this information we already know. So keeping that out of the picture and then asking about good health, what don't we have in it?
Tom, go back again to your notion of why that would be a good, important jump-off point. So, in other words, if now at this end we're going to say we're going to make some recommendations to the county on the studies that need to be done and the monitoring that needs to be done. Say again, we're here. What's the connect? I want to follow. I want to make sure we don't.
I have seen the narrower definition of health, absence of disease, be used to eliminate more squishy effects on health that are stress related. Kids not doing well because their home environment is being disrupted by an industrial. Those sorts of things are not diseases. Sometimes they're not diseases.
They're dis-ease.
Yeah, but I would hope we wouldn't exclude those things. But I also understand that we can make the definition so broad that our recommendation for further study has no real meat to it. I would like to hear what Jim has to say.
Well, I mean, I take basically a hard-nosed physiological response, but if the issue is going to be WHO well-being, well, we can make it, we could recommend in our parameter specifications to the county that we get psychologists involved, not just medical doctors, but real psychologists, and there's a lot of questionnaires and poll taking, and they know a lot about taking these surveys that would get at people's view of what their well-being is. So, and you're comfortable at night, in your own home. And so I think, although it has to be balanced tests that get at well-being, I think we can get some psychological people involved here that is appropriate and get at some of these more issues.
Actually, Dr. Kilboy's stuff actually takes into consideration about a psychological test.
Well, just need to pick up a little
Oh, I said that actually some of the things on his are actually some psychological testing as well.
Anybody else want to weigh in? Yeah.
I would just say there's some other parts of the stress is a very real thing, and the psychological stuff I think is real, and it goes beyond some of the things we've talked about to the stress of having to sue the Department of Health. I talked about one of the lawsuits that I did. The Department of Health refused to promulgate air standards for geothermal development. I had to sue them. I lost in the court here. I lost on appeal at the next level, regional court or whatever it is. And we had to go to the Hawaii Supreme Court where we won because the law said they were supposed to do that. But it's been that way throughout this whole process. So basically, the community has had to fight the government to get basic protections that we believe, and I actually supported geothermal. I know people are going to find this really hard to believe. I actually supported geothermal when this thing started. And I changed my opinion because what has happened and what I've seen happen and what happened to me personally and what happened to the community. And that's why I feel the way I do. And a big part of that, the blame lies in the government and the blame lies in the developers because of how they did it. And I've been called a liar. I've been called all kinds of names. I don't support anything. But I'll tell you this, I support solar power. I support Pacific biodiesel. I support organic farming. There's lots of things that I support. I was not born opposing geothermal. I oppose geothermal for a very real reason, and a lot of that is stress related.
Yeah, one more thing, and that was Dr. Dunn's and I were talking kind of at the break, and he was noting, he lived and worked those years in East Texas, and there were a lot of oil refinery and that kind of activity there. And he was noting that they really didn't see a lot of complaint about folks that lived in there and had problems with the processes that went on, which are not so dissimilar to what's going on down the way. But we were also noting that that the refineries were there, people who moved there were biased by the fact that they chose to go to those places to live and work and live. And so they're going to be maybe perhaps a little less likely to complain than, say, a group of folks in a community like down here who have, for whatever reason, they're living in the shadow of a 30 megawatt geothermal plant. Now all of a sudden, take that number and multiply it times 10. So 300 megawatts, 500 megawatts. So that it seems inevitable that people's lives will change because of that, and those people were there first. So there's just that. I don't know how we register that in, how we factor that into it, but it's people were in this environment or have chosen to stay in this environment, and now geothermal's coming in, so that needs to be factored into the standards, acceptable standards of condition.
Yeah.
So.
Sitting on my anthropologist hat,
Hey.
there's also cultural reasons why, for example, in some cultures that we have represented in our population in Hawaii, you don't make waves, you accept, you keep quiet about things, you don't, because complaining is putting yourself forward, and that's not being humble. And being humble is a cultural value. Things like that. So, we have to, if you're going to look at reasons why, some people complain and some people don't, you get into that realm also. Besides individual psychology, you get the cultural.
Let me suggest that we've kind of taken a pass at this, and I don't think we need to come to conclusion today. It will get inevitably revisited as we say, here's the kind of studies we think we need to do. So what I want to do is, as a final discussion, and then open it up to our friends who've been listening very hard and observing, and they may have questions and comments. I'd like to ask each of you if you have a very preliminary hypothesis, theory of the kind of study you need to do. What is it? And you can fully reserve the right to say, next meeting, I changed my mind. I changed my mind. And I believe this is where I think you talked a little bit about some of the monitoring, and I'm actually encouraging you between meetings to do some harder thinking on that.
Yeah.
But what is the kind of study? Now, I'm not talking yet about monitoring, but more about what do you think the study is? If we are here at meeting 2, and at the end of meeting 5, we're going to turn a report. Do you have a theory of the kind of study that we ought to be thinking about?
We can study past data, of course, because we have a lot of data available. We can do that on the chemical aspects of it, since that's my field of study. We have prior monitors and prior sampling done from the Health Division and PGV, and I don't know if EPA did any or not. We can analyze the highs and lows and do statistical information on expected minimal exposures to maximum blowout exposures over a range. We can do that and get a general 20-year picture of what's been happening chemically over a whole since its conception till now. We could easily develop that kind of a study. Just parts per million.
Like, especially if PGV wants to get off the hook, is this really a problem that's a combination of PGV and HGPA, or is this an HGPA problem? I also want to look at the water. I want to test the water all the way downhill from the power plant, because they re-inject up to 3.8 million gallons of this same stuff a day into the aquifer, or through the aquifer. And I know that EPA said that they did have a leak. I know they had another well casing failure recently. So is there a problem from the water?
Let me move on.
I still got more.
Well, I'm not trying to collect them all. I'm saying what's the one that rises up to the top, because this is our third meeting. This is the subject of the next meeting.
I spent months, at least 6 months, researching people before we contacted Dr. Kilmore to see who could do this study. I'm not a medical expert. I can't say what kind of study we should do. I can say we should study HEPA, we should study the water. I would defer to Dr. Kilborn just based on having looked at Dr. Bates and all the other leading people. I think Dr. Kilborn can design a study that we should.
Okay, I just want to be very clear that we're not here to pick a winner among the researchers.
I'm not trying to pick a winner. I'm saying
I want to be very clear about that.
Even if he doesn't do the study, maybe he could design the study.
Well, that's the better issue. Is the question is what's the kind of studies we think need to be done. So I just want to be clear.
Well,
I know you're very.
I'm not qualified to say it.
Okay. Jay, what's on your head? And there may be many different things, but which one rises up to the top? And you say, if I had a hypothesis about what we'd want to come out with at the end for a study, today's hypothesis that could change.
Sure. Well, I tried to ask earlier, what should we test with the clinicians that were here. I really don't know. I'm qualified. I haven't heard the answers. I understand there's some physical things that really should just happen without any doubt. That we need more monitoring, water, soil, air sampling, all of that stuff. Sound attenuation, that there's things that can actually be done. We need to recommend that all those things be done in some orderly fashion by some professional group. And some people may not want to do it, but we may need to rely on government agencies to help us with some of that. We can't just assume the government is against us. Those things are given, and we all agree, or else we wouldn't be here. Some of that stuff needs to happen. I don't know. When I first came into this, I thought we could come up with getting our toes wet and creating a questionnaire and training people to go out and actually do face-to-face time with a large chunk of the population and get some kind of larger opinion. There's some people go out and ask people in their group, what are your complaints? And obviously, asking that in one fashion, you get one kind of answer, as opposed to how you ask the question makes a big difference sometimes. So I don't know. I thought we would do something like that to begin with, rather than get involved in kind of study that Dr. Gilbert is doing. That may be something that needs to happen, but I'm not prepared to say that.
Laura, you're telling me I skipped you and I didn't mean to do that. I'm coming back around anyway, but you have a thought on the kind of study that you think at the end of our process?
I think that the program has to be and also to be doing the study more what's fitting in terms of study.
Exposure study. Yeah.
I didn't know about the HGVA site. This now puts a whole different twist on how I would look at things. My question is, do we have a possible Superfund site in our backyard? This now raises a very big red flag. This is something that we should not, in any circumstances, sweep under the rug or give just minor credence to. This is a serious situation. And I'm shocked. I didn't know this. I'm sorry. I'm not long here on the island. Now I want to know about GPA.
Most people don't know that.
HGPA.
Most people have no idea about that.
Yeah, this is not good. This is not good.
Let's keep going around. Al, got a thought about endgame of what might be floating up in your head for the kind of study that's the highest priority in your mind?
This doesn't even have to do directly with the study we're doing right now. It has to do with the county, or rather the state, give them a total authority to do what they want to do with geothermal. We, as a county of Hawaii, have no authority right now, the way it's written. My biggest concern is we're spending all this time here doing this study, doing this work, hoping that somebody's going to grasp hold of it and do something serious about it. But me being here 20 years with the state of Hawaii, I'm really questioning this whole issue. And I know you're going to do the best you can. There's no question in my mind about that. The question is, in my mind, is after you've done all your work, all of us have done all our work, is it going to go down the hole like everything else in this county of Hawaii? And if that's the case, I'm really upset.
So I gotta bring you back because it's beyond the scope of what I think we can do. But what the question will be, what is, in light of that, what is any notions yet of the kind of study you'd say, look, we're here to examine the health and potential harms. That's what we're about. If there are harms coming out of PGV and by extension HDPA, what are they? What do we recommend? What's the studies that would say yes or no or?
So what's the county going to do with it? That's the question.
What's the county going to do with it?
Right.
Okay.
I'd like to kind of follow up
It's
on
a fair,
that.
look, it's a fair question. I'm just saying,
I
can deal with what we got in front
Well,
of us.
I just want to point out one thing real quick, is this has been going on 20, 30 years. And this is not a new issue, and we've been screaming for a house study for a long, long time. And we've never gotten one. And I can see why Al feels the way he feels, because we don't have any faith in government. I don't. And I didn't start out that way, just like I didn't start out. I believed I was going to be protected. I went to the Department of Health. Before I ever did anything to be a community activist on this issue, I spent 2 years talking to the county about it, and they were telling me, don't worry about it, it's a short-term thing, we're going to take care of you, we'll either buy your house or do something. And after 2 years, they had sent me around to 7 different people. And I went around that circle twice. And at the end of that 2 years, after being around that circle twice, I realized they weren't going to do anything. And to this day, they, in my opinion, having dealt with it, and I have dealt with this extensively, for the money, for whatever reason, the state and local government is in bed with these geothermal developers. They want, whether it's because they want this geothermal power for whatever reason, the state wants this project, and they sacrificed us.
Royalties.
Look, I know you guys want to go to the policy problem, the policy question, and the county and broken trust with that. But
now it goes to the faith in the process that we're doing. We're going to do this work, like Al said. We're going to put this forward. But are we going to end up with the same thing that has happened every time in the past?
I don't know. Yeah, my answer is
I think we should be aware of that, and that's part of what we should, when we bring this forward, that should be part of what we bring forward.
My belief is we have a bully pulpit around here. We have a perch on which to say some things and do some things. And if you don't believe that, then why would you be wasting your time?
I'm here. I'm participating in the process.
I know.
But I'm also not, I've got my eyes open, and I've been participating in the process for 30 years. So I have to say what I have to say about what it's been like.
Woody Allen said, the cup of life is probably more than half full, but it's got some arsenic in it. So let's keep going. I'm trying to stay focused on what is the study at the end game that's in your head at this moment.
Okay. I guess I think that I can see that it'd be great to establish some kind of a baseline, and a good way to do that would be a cross-sectional study of the health. We're talking about health studies to start out with. Cross-sectional health study for the community, so we know how we are now, how the community is now. A kind of a baseline study of a snapshot in time, and then to take care of that through the future, or to the future, is to consider a longitudinal section of that as well. So not only do we know how we started out, but we know how we are going through this as development occurs. I like the idea of, in terms of monitoring exposure, I really do think that science part of me wants to see what our exposure is, and if we're going to have credibility about complaints in the future, it seems like exposure monitoring, credible exposure monitoring, and lots of it is a good way to do that. I like the idea of the 360 around a plant. At the same time, I think having I think having monitors interspersed in the community is also a really good thing, and that those data need to be available to community members all the time. Basically, that you see this. And then I think the other thing to consider, and this is based on, there's a community that's located on a volcano, Miyakejima volcano. It's 100 miles to the southwest of Tokyo. And that is a beloved island. It's a tiny island. It's about the size of Hilo. And that people don't want to leave that community, even though this volcano is putting out a lot of SO2. It's affecting people's health. But they are, everybody's kind of, there's a lot of monitoring. The monitoring data are very careful, are very fully available. And there are measures in place to protect people's health. So that'd be my first Christmas wish. Miyakejima is the name of the volcano. It's actually the name of the island.
I'm not understanding.
This.
I understand that there's a community that
yes.
they have measures in place.
Yes.
Are you suggesting a study on the measures they do, or
I think it's yes. I think it's.
Those measures,
I think it's. I'm not sure that. It's not an exactly adaptable. Let's do what they're doing, but I think it's the health studies and monitoring that we do. It's great to tune it towards ourselves, but we're not alone. There are over 500,000 people worldwide that much higher than that. Sorry, not 500,000. Over 5 million people worldwide that have that are living on and near the slopes of volcanoes. And so it's good to look and see what other folks are doing as well that have come up with adaptive strategies. So,
Jim?
Well, I think first of all the study should be statistically impeccable. So I think I see two major components of achieving that. One is this recommendations have to force the study to identify controls, as the case may be. And those controls should be chosen to eliminate correlates with health issues so that we can get at a causal relationship. And the correlations that I'm worried about are on two sides. One, physical, that there are other things other than the plant that are causing things, and behavioral or medical, so that people might have sociological or gender or other kinds of characteristics that are causing these health issues other than the plant itself. So I'd like us to recommend controls and identification of these correlations that may explain the control or the differences.
So remember, what I'm asking is just your intuitions about the kind of studies, because we still have a pretty deep dive to do on this. Renee, did you already tell us this?
Yeah, well, that the Wolf Moore mentioned a whole bunch of things, and I thought that was, I got pretty upset when I read that, because he hasn't even met us, and he's making these judgments. But I know we're going to hear those judgments, and we, even in our first meeting, talked about mitigating factors in people's health, such as whether they smoke, whether they were alcoholics, or this and that. And that can be addressed very easily in a health study with a medical history, and then whoever's doing the study can say, well, of all of these people, the people who, even if you take out the people who smoke, this blah, 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 this is the numbers. Basically, I think we need to do a health study, not to prove that there are health impacts, because we know there are, but to identify them, and correlate them with what's coming out of the plant, as opposed to other things around in the atmosphere or in lifestyles. But basically, the reason for it all is that the study should lead us to create a list of mitigating recommendations so that the community can be protected. And I think that's the bottom line of doing this whole thing, is that ultimately we want to protect the community, and our recommendations have to be based on information, have to be based on data and science, but the idea is, where do we go from here, and how are we gonna use that to make sure that our community doesn't continue to get poisoned?
Yeah, last comment, because I want to open it up for others who've been sitting
Continue
patient.
on with her, she's right, because the question is, how many more of these plants does Hawaii County want to install? And obviously, one or two more. So protecting future communities is going to be the key issue. And our studies should focus, as she's saying, on how do we make sure that future communities are going to be protected because of the health studies that we now do. This should be our goal.
Good. You're gonna see all this in the note. You're gonna get this, and we'll be able to kind of think this stuff through, and then we'll structure our third meeting. Hang on. Can I finish? So we're gonna structure our third meeting so that we can actually do a much deeper dive and look at how these pieces begin to fit together. Yes.
Okay. At our last meeting, I had asked Lester, because we're talking about demographics and health problems that are recognized in the data that's available, and I had asked Lester about what I thought was the 2011 Department of Health primary care data book. In a way.
Yeah, that's new.
Yeah. So, I understand he emailed you the link to it.
To the study? Did I not get it out?
You did not get it out there, so I wanted to read off that link to everybody.
Oh, yeah. If I own that one if I didn't get it out, because I got a whole lot of stuff coming in.
All right, it's hawaii.gov/health/doc/PCNA 2012 databook.pdf.
We'll put it out there. And my apologies.
And that breaks down all the various health things by district, so that
So that's
you have strict.
health surveillance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter, I'd like to hear from Harry Kim. He's got a
Well,
lead.
hang on. Do you mind if I do this? I'd like to open it up for people to speak.
Well, let me just say, I want to hear from him because he was head of civil defense. He was
told me
with
this.
Wilson Goddard. He worked
He's
in the
gonna stay,
Department of Health.
we're all gonna have a chance to talk.
Okay.
Yeah,
He's hanging out.
I'm trying to
He's
tell
hanging
you.
out especially to get his voice in, but he's respecting the group.
Yeah,
Like
so
I
I
asked.
want to give everybody a chance, and the only question I want to put in front of people is I'd like you to be brief and right to the point. Because otherwise, we don't get around to everybody. So the floor is open, and our job now is to listen.
One question, there's some data we requested the first time that hasn't been received yet. Can we send that to you by email and
Yes.
you remind the people
And
we
we'll
have?
copy that.
Okay, thank you.
And if I've dropped the ball on a couple of those, my apologies. Steve.
Since I've been here since 11 o'clock.
And this is your home, your house, your holiday.
Can I yield the floor to Harry and I will go after Harry? Okay.
Harry.
I would like to assume if you tell me shut up and I'm going on board. Or anybody here.
I'll help you with that.
Sitting here, really listening, I hope you all of you know, no disrespect to any of you. But I really don't understand the vast majority of why you're discussing what you're discussing. I truly mean that. I look at this picture here, and this one picture alone tells you of all the violations that happened for 8 years. I was in charge of civil defense from 1976 until after the year 2000. I'm the only one that responded to 100% of the calls for help to the government job. The frustration of a person like me is simply this. You and all of us who have a job responsible for the health and safety of people. All of us who are also responsible for being stewards of this land, air, and water. I would challenge anyone on this statement and put it directly. We fail miserably. I do not understand what this discussion is about. The last time I told the governor and the lieutenant governor, this was before I did a stupid thing of running for mayor again. And I said, you know, Governor, all I'm asking for is one thing, and that's what I'm asking of you, Doctor. All California, the state of California, which produces roughly 2/3 of the geothermal production in the United States of America. Yes, there is a difference because California is clean steam, and we're what they call hot rock magma geothermal. In short, we have a residue that is toxic. Their residue is H2O. So it just runs out. Because nature already took care of the toxins. This is a violation of everything you can read about EPA on geothermal. There is nothing within the system of hybrid that's supposed to be back to the surface, whether it be of solid residue or whether it be of steam. All of this is supposed to be what PGD does, right? You know that. No residue of any kind supposed to hit the surface. It goes in, out, back. And the rule says back into the area of source. Is this your area of source? I wish all of you could feel what I'm trying to tell you because I was the one, I was the one that heard people scream, yell, frustration. Why can't you do something? I was just so vexed. It was of us in government, whether it be Department of Health, Land and Natural Resources. I'll ask you, sir, and not to put you on the box, but well, you know, this is what I told the government. This is just a few months ago. All I'm asking you, God, because yes, you asked me, sure, Harry, are you against geothermal? I said, absolutely not. I am just asking us to do our responsibilities that you, the people, and the future generation want and expect and demand that we do. Our job of protection of land, air, water, and people of today. And I told the governor this, and the lieutenant governor at the time, Schultz, because the governor told me to speak to him, and it was this. You surely must know people in California that has a tremendous monitoring and enforcement system. All I'm asking you to do is in your promotion of geothermal, copy something that is already there, give the people of this island the confidence that we are doing it right. All you have to do is make one call and tell government, I call the people in California, I said, if any of our authorities call you, would you come here and help us? Their answer, absolutely. We have yet to ask. I want point back to bottom out. I'm not picking on you. We went through some, that's what I used for fantasy. In the old days, we knew that was wrong. Where is the monitoring system today? You know we have one air monitoring system. The air monitoring system of today, if you were to tell California what we have, as far as policies, enforcement, personnel, equipment, I told the governor, you're going to be one disappointed governor because you have been so badly misled on what we need. And I will say to you, sir, the issue is not for or against you at all. How much time do I have to tell people that? The issue is to establish a system of enforcement, of monitoring, that will ensure the people we are monitoring. The California system is based on clean steam. You know what we have? One Pencil Point air monitoring system someplace in Puna. One. We all know H2S. It can pass that needle point up and down, left and right, or whatever. And when I read in the paper Department of Health that you people terminated one of your air monitoring systems for lack of funds, it makes me sick of our responsibility to you. I'll tell you what I want this group to do. You have an opportunity here, sir, by listening to these people, to put pressure on those that need to be pressured, and it is not the county government of Hawaii. It is not their responsibility by law. It is a state government of Hawaii. They're responsible by law to establish policies on this system. Look at that picture. I asked all of you. For 8 years, I responded to calls from people. My kid is getting sick. My kid got to run. I used to go there early in the morning just to look at the kids run to the skiing. And you read. My God, this is an unabated system. That's against the law. Unabated system, they call it a rock abatement system. And you walk and you see the residue falling into the ground. I swear if that was private, strictly private, that person be in jail today. My appeal to you, yes, you can go on your health thing. Regardless of what the health studies show or don't show. You know, for 7 years I went to the doctor because I had problems breathing. I'll tell you what I regret. From daily exposure to those things and not taking care of myself or the people that work with me. Why? Because I wasn't told about anything of the potential hazards to me. Whose responsibility is that? It is the state responsibility. We have a responsibility to be able to do it right from here on in. I'm scared of our land, our air, and our water, and the present system. God forbid if anything will happen. I think PG&E is doing a damn good job. But there are certain things they cannot control. It was pointing out any type of sheer earthquake is a potential danger. I mean, we all saw a Gulf oil spill. And what good is it to blame after it's over? We have an opportunity here to strongly request to study the California system of enforcement and mine. I'll give you one example and I'll close. And I gave this to the governor. If I want to do exploratory drilling in California in the sub-zone area only, I have to put down a cash bond just for exploratory drilling. I have to develop a plan in regards to personnel contracts. I have to prove that the person assigned to that well is available to the California authority 24/7, and he or she must live in California. You have to see your rules. And I'll close with this. Because that's what I told the government. As a citizen, as a person, probably the oldest in this room, care and love this land, I'm scared of us, of what we're doing. Number two, all I ask you to do is call California. Show them what you have passed a law as for geothermal here and future geothermal and see what they say. All I ask you to do is show it to them that it's 5597. And the policies we have enforced today, the program we have today, they say, this is what I have. What do you think? They're the experts. Just ask them, what do you think? I said, they were shit. That's exactly what I told them. And I don't want to use profanity about the ladies here. That's like Steve, there's a swear worse than I. And the second thing I told them, what you're going to find out is that you have been so greatly misled by the people you trust. Then give me an example, Harry. It's easy. Your cabinet head just had an interview with a star advertiser just recently. And he said, I don't know what all the fuss is about, and the concern is about. Drilling for geothermal is like drilling for water. If you want that quote, I'll get it for you when you start advertising.
Yes, sir.
If this is your belief on geothermal, naturally we're going to do what we're doing now. If this is your belief on geothermal, you do not care to enforce strong rules. These are not the people you ask about health studies. You know who should be here? The state people, even some federal people. They should be interviewing. They should make a conclusion and recommendation. This is what you need. This is what we need to know. That thing that you say was closed because we begged Governor Whitehead, you've got to close this plant. The harm it is doing to women and children and people with respiratory problems, you've got to close it. And so look it up. The governor ordered it closed in 1998. For what? After 8 years of crying and begging of the public of this land, can't you help us? Well, I'm asking you, you can help them.
Good, thanks. Mayor Harris, thank you. I'm gonna ask everyone to be brief and to the best you can, focus on the health.
Just a couple comments. I think that rather than a health study, the real study we need is where to put a geothermal plant. Because Speaker Kwame is a real optimistic guy. You ask anybody that knows me, if you tell me I can't do something, I'm gonna try to do it. Okay? I know, however, that even if this study has proves inconclusively that the plant is affecting health of the city, without a doubt that there is a definite tie-in, there will be nothing done. Because for reasons what Harry just said, the problem is, no matter how you mitigate it, it is in the wrong place, and you're not going to fix that up. So you should already study on how to relocate it. I got a second point. You know, the whole thing about noise. Yeah, the air, we can't be technical and say the noise. They're gonna keep on drilling. They're gonna drill. They're injecting the spent fuel down. They're cooling off their own reserve. They're gonna keep on drilling. So there's gonna be noise after noise. The thing is, it's not gonna stop. It's a nuisance in a community. That's a basic thing. You know, it's a nuisance. And it's going to keep on being a nuisance as long as it's located there. Now, as a water person, I got to tell you guys real strongly, I've been in the water all my life, okay? And I've been on this coast 40 years. There is a definite change in the off-life marine environment. No more turtles, no more schools of micro, no more schools of manatee, no runs of thing, the lanterns don't come in. The thing is changing now. How are you going to figure that? Well, warm water. Warm water. Oh, must be coming from upslope. Everybody knows water seeks its own level. It goes downhill. The thing is pouring into the ocean. The stuff, the 3.8 million gallons they're pouring back is now leaching to the ocean. I know, because I see it. I'm visually down there. I'm a water guy. I spend a lot of time in there. And there'll be other people. But where are the studies? Where are the baseline studies? There's no baseline study. Hawaii has been stupid. All these years of uncontrolled development, we don't take baseline study. Now is the time to start, at least in the health study. But more importantly, the study should be where to put the plant.
Thank you. Others? Yep. I'm going to honor as many as I can. I encourage brevity and right to the point. Sir, then you.
We're in the problem today because the state of Hawaii chose a mediation process that you know, Peter, personally doesn't work over a contested case here. So every property owner that was affected by this is a subclass property owner, doesn't have the protections of every other property owner in the state. And if that wasn't changed by our illustrious Senator, late Senator Inoue in the legislature, we wouldn't be in this problem now. So now we have to play catch up. And mediation didn't do it, you know it. And if mediation would have been effective, we wouldn't be here 20 years later with the same issues. So it's really incumbent on you to know the failings that you helped deliver to rectify the situation. How many of the people in the room here are getting paid to be here?
I am.
My point.
Thank you. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Hi, Peter.
Hi.
How
are you?
Sorry, I get late, but since I had a chance to speak up, I went on that junket that the state took us to California, and yes, they do it a lot better than we do. If the gases go up over 5 parts per billion, the beeper on the compliance officer's belt beeps, and they have to take care of it, or they get shut down. And that's just one example. There's a lot of examples. Steve mentioned contaminating the groundwater and eventually going down into the seawater level. Maurice Richard, 30 years ago, told us that that was happening, that there already was groundwater contamination. And yes, the geothermal water is going down towards the sea.
Can you tell them who Maurice Richard was?
He was the plant manager when they applied for the permit in PGV. The original.
He was the mouthpiece for PGV.
Yeah, he helped. Anyway, I'm here because yesterday I found out that the effects or whatever the gases or whatever are cumulative, that they won't come on whatever. So I think I better stay involved because I've been living there for a long time. And my health, long time is affected. So lastly, I came late and I heard you say, why are we wasting our time?
No, I wouldn't say that.
Huh?
That's not what I said.
What?
I asked the question if we were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That really struck me because that, for all these years, about 30 years, I'm not sure. Why, Peter? Why are we here? Are we wasting our time?
Let me just clarify. We were talking about a study of complaints. So we were not talking about everything.
Yeah, it's just my expression.
Yeah.
Just, from
Sorry,
what I heard.
and
I guess I just like to conclude there. My knowledge. Why are we here? And are we wasting our time? And thank you.
For those that don't know, Luana is one of the closest neighbors to the PGV plant, and she's lived there since the very beginning. It's downwind of the plant.
She was there with HCPA with them.
No, we're not downwind. Fortunately, I'm
Well,
still alive.
If you don't mind, so I'm going to go to people who've been here all day. If you don't mind. Sure. So no hair.
What Bob said about the contamination in Louisiana. I also question about Puna. Did they clean up their contamination? The contamination
I have
up
pictures
there?
of
So
Puna.
I don't
No,
know
they
if
did not.
Puna should be included in because that was the first
This is
drilling.
Puna.
Yeah, and when
Can
I
you
went
pass
to
it around?
visit
They'll
it,
all come back
that
to you.
was 4 years
We
ago.
got them here.
They mentioned that they hadn't done anything, so I don't know if anything's been done since. So that's one issue. I am a nurse, and I was very impressed with Dr. Kilburn because he's an excellent diagnostician. I recommend that you make sure whoever does this is good at it, because he was concerned about people faking. And when you got a good diagnostician, they can't fake.
I can see through it.
Yeah, and you can't, even as a nurse, I couldn't take that and do it because I'm not good. He knows all. He knows everything about H2N. So he's going to catch all that. So I really encourage you to do that. Also, one of the things I wanted to ask him and I forgot, I had heard that the spread of contamination is 10 miles. So to me, nobody should be living within 10 miles of a geothermal plant. And that's a mistake they make in the islands. There's two people too many close. That's why we're all here. We're all close. Why they put it in a place that's going to be, we're an ag district. We don't want to change. We don't want to be industrial. So if there's a way of documenting that there needs to be not just 2-3 miles, but whatever that is, and they laugh when they say 10 miles because if the wind is blowing right, it's going to be more than 10 miles. So I'm not sure this island can even have one. Of course, I believe in Tutupeli too, and I don't think it should be here, period. Okay. But geothermal, California, fine. I live not that far away from them, 30 miles. Because I grew up I lived in Napa Valley for 40 years. Okay, here, Ole. And I'm disappointed that a Hawaiian governor did this to us. Very disappointed. I came home, when I came home, I thought Puna had taken care of it. I thought, oh good, don't you tell them move home. I didn't even check because I thought it was done. I didn't think people were so stupid that they would put money before people's lives. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Nohea. How about others who have been, Mike, again, I'm going to honor people who've been here all day, so I'll promise you'll get to talk. So hang tight.
Well, first off, this from
being part of the process. I wanted to say thank you to Peter and all the volunteers for, taking the time out and effort in doing this. And I know that the chart is focused on health and monitoring. And, me coming from the plant, I'm all for it. If we have to do more, then that's what we need to do. And we need to understand what's going on. That's fine. And whatever we can do, we're going to continue to participate, provide information. I may still owe some stuff, what have you. But I think you guys are doing a great job in such a short time and trying to accomplish what tasks you guys have at hand, the health and the monitoring aspect primarily. You can tell it's very emotional. There's all aspects besides just those two primary things. And the only comment I wanted to add is to add to what Al and I think what Bob said. 20 years, 30 years, we've been trying to get folks to help, primarily government. I mean, my only suggestion would be once this recommendations come to fruition, that take it to the next level. I mean, take it to the senators and to the representatives who are at the state level. And hopefully, they can help out. And if need be, take it even to the federal level. Get Senator Shops and others that hopefully can help out.
You say that you would support an enforcement monitoring system?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. We feel like we're complying with what we have in place today, but if the results of this study show that we need to up the monitoring, up whatever we need to do, fully support it.
I know I took my time, but I just want to clarify. The issue here with California interface cells is not to see, it's to prevent something from happening. So you have to establish a monitoring enforcement system before it can happen. And this is what we're trying to push. In my opinion, wait till it's too late, it's too late.
So yeah, the charter, health and monitoring, so I'm all supportive 100%.
Thank you, Mike. Before I jump to these folks, yes, you've been here since 1 o'clock.
I have, haven't I? Well, in an effort to provide complete transparency, yes, this meeting is being recorded. I'll upload it to YouTube. The channel is Occupy Hawaii. Anybody that wants this video before I leave the building, just let me know, and I'm happy to let you download it to my camera or my computer.
Thank you.
Okay? I think it's all there except for about a minute or two when I had to plug in for the battery. But other than that,
proviso is if you're going to film the whole thing, so you're not just selecting one.
I agree with you. Plus, I'm lazy and I don't like to edit. So, I wanted to say that, and I wanted to say that I'm the one that wrote the health study, the women's health study this past summer. I wrote it. I organized all the meetings. Me and Jane and Aurora did that. We took in about 50 surveys. After about 20 of them, and I'm not from here. I live up the hill, so I'm not affected by it. And I thought I might be the only one that doesn't have hydrogen sulfide brain and be able to pull this together. So that's why I helped with it. And I found after about 20 surveys or so that we needed to do more testing. I needed to do cognitive function testing and depression scales, first off. Those are within my skill set. That's why I went for those. So that's what I wanted to say about the women's health study. It was always just a survey. It was never meant to be a study. And I did 5 many-mental status exams on 5 of the women. 2 of them failed. Now, granted, that's a tiny study, but those 2 that failed both have master's degrees in nursing. They should not have failed. They were 50 years old. So that's, I agree with Mr. Kim. I don't know what we're doing here. Honestly, I don't know why you get paid $50,000 and there's still no donuts on the table.
Next time, donuts.
So,
It's the afternoon.
I'm for donuts. Let the record show.
Good. Thank you for that. And again, if you, Jane, if you guys feel useful, bring the data forward, bring your survey. I understand it's confidential, much of it, and we're not trying to violate that. Jane.
I just want to say that I feel, and I was ignorant of this, but Bob brought up HPJ site analysis. I think that should be on top of the list. And that's just sitting out there, still polluting everything. And also to test the water that's going from the plant. And I think that we should go on, if we do get to the health study part of it, after those two get taken care of, that Dr. Kilborn's analysis of the way he does his testing, I think is excellent. But what we need to remember first and foremost is the power of all you people, and write to the state, write to anybody that you've elected, and let them know what Harry Kim talked about today. You don't have to mention his name, but you know the power of what we need to get to those people.
Good, thank you. Okay, you folks have been very patient. Thank you. Brief. Oh, yes, sorry. Suzanne.
I just wanted to address the point that came up earlier about the tumble touch. The reason that I started thinking about the definition of health came up because of reading there was a paper from the American and Canadian Wind Energy Association, and they were looking into whether there was a health impact from the noise of wind farms. And so they've done a study of studies. And aside from any concerns I might have about the validity of their conclusion, because they have, their own motivation, they found that there were no health impacts from the noise of wind farms. So, in terms of what you were asking, what kind of studies need to be done? What kind of recommendations for studies? I just looked back up at the County of Hawaii Planning Commission permit from 2001 for PGV, and Mike will probably know this far better than me, but in this multi-page document, the geothermal resource permit issued by the County of Hawaii Planning Commission, and in accordance with Section 205, blah, blah, blah. So the proposed geothermal development activities would not have unreasonable adverse health, environmental, or socioeconomic effects on residents or surrounding properties. So this is a statement that justifies that they can give the permit for PGV's operation. So I think maybe an important study would be an impact study in which people who have been affected, or people who are around the geothermal development, whether it have been HDPA, because that obviously is relevant even now, but certainly PGV, need to understand what do people actually feel when they're around these kinds of developments. Because aside from the fact that probably the rules have changed now, and maybe there's no need to show that there would not be unreasonable adverse health, environmental, socioeconomic effects on residents. So that's another issue, that's the political side of it. But I think we should assume that those are important factors in deciding whether or not PGV should be allowed to continue, and whether or not future development should be allowed to occur. And I think that could be done in the study. I don't remember which one of you in the group, but somebody mentioned about actually doing a questionnaire where a lot of these things could be addressed. Noise, fear, because I'm pretty rational, but there are times when I get afraid about that plant. And Mike's heard about it from me before. These things are not quantifiable, but they are impacts, and I think they're important.
Thank you, Suzanne. Yes.
Thank you. I apologize we weren't here earlier. The date was that meeting is so we went to a gathering in the valley, I'm very concerned with the previous meeting when I said to you, sir, I mentioned Dr. Sam Rubin's health study. His clinic will be conducted within days after the 1991 blowout, and that was a whole community center. And people came to him from many, many, many subdivisions, including Inaloa. People were affected in Inaloa. People, animals, both. So I don't know if Dr. Sam Rubin Skyped in.
He did.
He did. Your comment to me was, well, do you know how to get hold of this survey? Tell you. Sir, I did state in the previous meeting that we did everything, both Greg Smith and myself. We were together and home together. So I mean, 21 years now. That we did our best to retrieve our statements from that study. And the health department in Hilo didn't know a damn thing about it, they said. They don't know anything about it. They hadn't seen the health study. Where is Dr. Rubin? Well, he isn't here anymore. And that in itself was disturbing. But soon after the health study, Sam went to Johnston Atoll, and when he came back, he cleared out his desk and left. And that's all we know about what happened to Dr. Sam Rubin. I hope he's all right. If he's Skyped in, he's alive and well. I'd like to have more information about where is Dr. Sam Rubin.
I think he lives in Hilo.
Yeah, well, he isn't in it. He has a non-published telephone number. So obviously, the gentleman doesn't want the public to be battering down his door. And I don't know if he's practicing medicine. If anyone here knows he's practicing medicine, how I can touch with him, my email address, I appreciate it.
Practicing on Kwajalein.
On Kwajalein?
Yeah, we spoke with him from Kwajalein today.
Oh, he's not in Hilo. She said she's in Hilo.
He has a house in Hilo.
He has a
lives
house
there
here.
full time. I think
So
he
far
has
as we
a
know.
3-year contract there.
Yeah.
All right.
So far as we know.
All right, thanks. The second matter is Dr. Kilburn. Phenomenal man. Absolutely phenomenal man. And I want to say this, I know it's going to be on YouTube, so I'm saying it again. I'm redundant, but my gosh, I want everyone to know this. When Dr. Legator, when Dr. Legator was conducting his health study, we were part of the health study. And we read a short excerpt of his findings via the computer. And he says we need more study concerning low-level, long-term exposure to hydrogen sulfide. I've been exposed to this noxious gas since, let's see, 1984. And I want everyone that's going to watch this on YouTube and everyone here, the public, to understand something. When I first came to this island and I went to a realtor, very nice lady in Kahora, she sent me to look at a few properties, one of which was at the bottom of the line. It was beautiful, it was shaded, it had deep earth, and it stunk of rotten eggs. So I went back to her and I said, what in God's name does that stink? She said, oh, don't worry about that, that's the experimental station, it's just the rotten egg smell, it doesn't hurt you. If we don't need a health study, I am not 70 years old and a human female. We do need a health study. Long-term, low-level exposure to H2S, as well as all the spice and all the toxicity that we incurred, that we ingested during the blowout, during well cleanouts, during whatever well malfunctions. When I was living in Seaview, I had constant headaches. And the only time I got rid of those headaches was going over to Puna to get his teeth fixed. And that was when they had trouble at TGV. You cannot tell me that we have not suffered and are suffering from H2S exposure. We are. We need this health study bona fide without the hocus pocus double talk from the health department. We need Dr. Kilburn. Thank you.
Thanks. Sir.
Just to reiterate something about the lack of marine life down on the coast. You know, I've been a commercial fisherman for 25 years. My last 3 years I spent out of Tahiti. I know the area very well as Steve does. And I've been subsistence fishing all my life. I hadn't been snorkeling or diving for almost 16 months. I've been surfing mostly. And when I got back in the water, we had a flat spill just a few weeks ago. And there was a distinct lack of life in and around Kohiki, and I swam a half mile to the north and a half mile to the south of the landing. And I did take into consideration winter, fisher, usually deeper water. I did do a few. I went into deeper water to look. There were more fish there, but they were still not in the numbers that I remember just 16 months ago. There's something definitely a problem. We don't have big turtles. We have maybe 2 in Kohiki Bay that day. 2 years ago, we used to have like 6. I mean, something is changing here. We know that there are many other factors too that affect marine life. But the main thing is since Harry Kim left his post as civil defense director, we have had no information coming from the plant, from the state, concerning what is actually happening on the plant site as far as toxicity and what's going on with the water. We never had tests of water quality at Kohiki or in the shallow water aquifers that we have around here. We just haven't had that. And I mean, I do come from the state of California, which has the largest amount of geothermal development. I talked with the driller, a guy named Dave, who was in charge of the last drilling that PGB did, and he was shocked. This is the man that makes drilling for PGB, for gas and oil, and his beautiful wife, Dee Dee. They're from Bakersfield, California. They did the last drilling here. He says he cannot believe, and he cannot believe that the state of Hawaii would actually treat the people of Puna the way it did. Because in no way would any geothermal plant in California be located amongst 2 subdivisions with over 1,000 house lots, plus maybe 200 agricultural lots in a 1-mile area. The closest he's ever heard of any human habitation in California, and this is from the wildcatter, the driller that did their job on this site. He says the closest he knows is 8 miles. All right, and they have 2/3. California has 2/3 of all geothermal development in the United States. All right. Again, and I'm sorry I was angry the last time, but this has to go. Nobody would have cared if PGB blew out, if it was in the lava fields east of the park, along the rift, or in the lava fields west of the park, in the Kapu Desert along the rift. Nobody lives out there. Out of sight, out of mind, blow out, so what? If the guys on the rig didn't get killed, all the more better, right? The reason this site is here, and I reiterate, is because the company Ormat is too cheap to cut roads into undeveloped areas. The power companies don't want to pay for the transmission lines out of those areas. That's why it's stuck here with us in our neighborhood. It's not just we need studies. We need this plant moved, and we need it yesterday. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Anybody else? Brief comment. Harry, hang on. I want to see if anybody, kind of one of the rules is nobody speaks twice before everybody spoke once. Anybody else got something? Otherwise, I'm going to ask Mary.
Yeah.
Paul.
I just wanted to mention, I live within a mile of the plant, and what I see is the noise issue is something that's always there. And I've been paying attention to the weather. I call Mike and complain about the noise, and we've both been speculating whether it's the wind or whether it's inversion or whatever. And it doesn't seem, from my own experience, to be related to which way the wind's blowing. And again, there's a lack of data about where is the noise going at a particular time. We only have a couple of monitoring stations. So what I would say is I would hope that this study would look at the impacts of the people that live around the plant, both dBA but also low frequency noise, and also take a look at what are the patterns and what's happening in real time. Because the impact on me is I'm awakened in the middle of the night by the plant. And I call Mike and he says, oh, it's normal operations, when there's nothing unusual happening. And so that actually raises our anxiety level because, one, we don't have good monitoring on H2S, so we really don't know what's going on. I like Mike. I don't think he would lie to me, but at the same time, I was up there with Bob when we smelled H2S. We could smell it. He calls the plant, and they say, well, there's not a problem. And we find out, well, there was a problem, but none of the monitors tripped. And so it does raise our anxiety level to hear the noise, to wonder what's going on in the middle of the night, and not have adequate monitoring. Then you add another layer, and you know that DOH and DLNR and the state, they're making royalties. There's money flowing out of this operation that flows into the state. And DLNR said in their last statement they spent $900,000 on geothermal in the last year. What did they spend it on? They certainly didn't spend it on monitoring. They didn't lend any money to DOH to monitor. So it is part of a larger issue. You hear a noise in the middle of the night that wakes you up. We don't know really what's going on. We know the state's not there. We know no one's paying attention, and it has an impact on us. So I ask you guys, figure out what it is we need as a baseline to actually know what's going on, and that'll help. Thank you.
Anybody else? Mayor Harry.
Harry, I think this meeting right here is probably the most important meeting I've had an opportunity to talk to people and what they need. So I'm kind of pleading with you. Right now, the state, as you know, the private sector is trying to develop the expansion of geothermal in the state, whether it be fracking or the system or hybrid system. I don't know what will occur. I do know that laws have been changed, like we tried to repeal, as you know, in '97. So any time in the past I found out when I voiced an opinion, whether it be straight to the governor or to the mayor, it is Harry is against geothermal. I don't know what words I can use to appeal to this board here in regards to what I think we can do. The priority is what was just stated here. The state of Hawaii has a responsibility to the environment and the people of this land to establish policies in the development of geothermal and a monitoring enforcement system of those policies. That is the strongest and best thing we can do for geothermal expansion. I said it's straightforward to the Department of Health in Honolulu, as well as the governor, lieutenant governor. We have a job to do here, and their job is to get the people's trust behind us again in regards to geothermal. And then once they get that trust that we will do this, of monitoring and protecting land and the people, I don't think they will have this distrust. And I'll close with this. Mike, you know it's, if you disagree, say so. We had a blowout in 1990. I was removed from the position of authority because I refused to approve the geothermal emergency plan because I say it was inadequate for many reasons. But the one reason that I want to leave with you here, the importance of it, is that you cannot let the private industry, it's not a matter of trust, but you cannot let the private industry determine the enforcement system, the policies, the levels, and the follow-up. There is no way that the public should call Mike, but that's the system today. There is no way that the public has to depend on PG&E's monitoring of the water and everything else in regards to H2S emissions for report if something happened. This is no different than, as I've said to people, my goodness, what would we be like if there's a speeder down the road and I depend on the speeders to call me and tell me we violated the law. And then they will tell me what they did to fix it. And if Tom complains, I saw this speeder They calls up the speeder, did you speed? Of course not. I make it light of it, but that's what we have today. I'm trying to impose on you what we can do. Please help in convincing the governor of the state of Hawaii that we need to establish policies. California has it all for you. You don't even have to copy all of it because they're so strict. But see what they do, and then see what we have, and we will find out we have nothing. We don't have an inferior system. We have a nothing system. And you want to expand geothermal with this system in place? And this is nothing against anybody in regards to here or the system in regards to ECB. We have that responsibility, and I think all of you know the state is pushing for expansion of geothermal, and I'll quote what they said, as Steve said. They got 20 companies waiting to come here. And I have a choke when the paper said they want to help us with our energy problem. Yeah, right. I asked Lisa, you have influence, you're the chairman of this group. I asked the members of this group. I'm not fronting you. I was responsible for the response of 100% of every emergency from 1976 to the year 2000. I know what we need. We cannot depend on the private sector to establish the standards. We cannot depend on the private sector to monitor. We cannot depend on the private sector to enforce. And when I stated that, EPA agreed. It is not the fault of PGV. It is the fault of us in government for not doing our job.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to stick around. If you want to chat for a few minutes, there's some virtual donuts over here. Help yourself.
Anybody would like to see the pictures of the HCPA, I'm happy to explain to you.